You're listening to Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Dark Matter Radio Network. Don't run and hide. Don't be afraid. Don't turn away any longer. The truth will set you free. And now, your host, the captain of conspiracy, the prince of paranormal. This ain't your daddy's radio network show. This is Jimmy Church, Fade to Black.
All right. Let's go. It's a Fade to Black Friday. How you doing? How you doing? All right, I'm getting all settled in. Here we go. Let's get the show cracking. Today's Friday, April 4th. 93 days into the new year. And as always, we are live from the JP Motorsports Studios right here in Burbank, California. For KJCR and the Dark Matter Radio Network, I am your host, Jimmy Church. Welcome to everybody listening around the country, around the world. And you know how we started off? Started off with a big salute to the proud men and women in uniform all around the world, fighting the good fight for us. Without them, there is no me, there is no you, there is no us. And you can't hear me right now. Think about it. All right, I'm ready. Actor Robert Downey Jr., 49 years old today. Pales in comparison, though, to actor Hugo Weaving. Played Agent Smith in The Matrix. You know him from everything else. Lord of the Rings, whatever. But what put him on the map and kept him there was Agent Smith. And that classic line of his, something like, you used to help your landlady take out the garbage. And that's what I'm talking about. 54 years old. Our dead guy's birthday's today. And I don't know what today is as far as the stars go. But check this out. Our dead guy's birthday is today. Heath Ledger, born in 1979 and died in 2008. And I thought about that today. 2008. It was 6 years ago? Wow. Heath Ledger. Guitarist and bluesman Muddy Waters, one of the greats. Born in 1915, died in 1983. Guitarist Gary Moore, for all of you severe rock heads out there, you know who Gary Moore is. Legend to us. Born in 1952, died in 2011. And actor Anthony Perkins, who played that iconic role of Norman Bates in Psycho. Born in 1932, died in 1992. Only 60 years old when he passed away. Tony Perkins. All right. Let's go. It's going to be a fun one tonight. We got a lot of stuff to get in, and I will do my best. Follow us on Twitter. Again, if you are over on Dark Matter Radio right now listening to the show, then you know what to do. Just right there, right where it says Fade to Black. Go and click on Twitter. I've got Twitter open right now. Interactions are coming in. Twitter's open. Oh, by the way, if you want to appear in the Twitter feed on Dark Matter, apparently I didn't know this, but I was instructed by our fearless leader today. It's hashtag DMRadioNet. Hashtag DMRadioNet. And then you'll be able to see your Twitter right there. Tonight, open lines. We're going to have David Marler in here talking about my favorite subject, black triangles. And that's what everybody is seeing these days. That's what we're being visited with, apparently. And if you want to tell us about your black triangle sighting, photograph, call in 323-825-5045. You can email throughout the show, Jimmy@jimmychurchradio.com. That's right. The producers here are opening up that email all night. We haven't figured out how they can do Twitter, and I can do Twitter at the same time. So right now I'm on my own when it comes to Tweeter. That new page that we have up is pretty cool. The Yekra Theater. Bunch of cool movies and documentaries over there. Hand-selected and picked by the staff here at Fade to Black. And I think I mentioned last night we're going to get to an extraterrestrial theme. We're going to do that soon, probably over the weekend. Tonight, like I said, David Marler, Black Triangles. And we will have him on at the bottom of the hour after I get through all of this other stuff. Like, you know, we are now officially today 4 weeks in. 4 weeks with Malaysian 370. And, of course, nothing new to report. And it seems that we've had 4 weeks of distractions, no truth, no debris, no real search area, and no details on anything. No details with the flight simulator, the passengers, radar, satellites. How about the cockpit recording? That's usually the first thing we hear, isn't it? Nothing on cell phones, absolutely nothing, which means to me there's something to hide. Why did the world wait to deploy submerged pinger locators until there was just a few days left of battery life in the pingers? I mean, if you know what you're doing, and you know that there are 30 days of battery life in those pingers, why do you wait for 30 days before you go and look for them? Please, somebody make some sense of this for me. Got so much email over the last 24 hours with different theories about what's going on. And if we have enough time at the end of the show tonight, I'm going to go over a couple of these theories, which 3 weeks ago I would have said, come on. Today, I'm thinking there's something to this. And I said it last night. As long as there's silence and as long as there's mistakes and lies, we're going to fill in the blanks for ourselves. Somebody better start talking soon. Yellowstone National Park. I posted today the video that's been flying all over the web, and I've watched it a few times, of, you know, these herds of bison running apparently away from Yellowstone Park up the highway. And this blogger, his name's Jay Lee, posted a video of these bison just trotting up the road past his car. And the video appears to show bison and other animals like in some kind of mass exodus from Yellowstone and causing all of this speculation. And, you know, it's kind of what the web has turned into these days. They just want to get clicks. So they post these videos. But this is, you know, I've never seen wildlife running up a street like that, not in a herd. So I posted the video and I asked, does anybody know what's going on? I don't. I've never been to Yellowstone. I haven't. So I don't have any frame of reference to this. And I got a bunch of email, a couple of tweets, a couple of posts. Well, actually, more posts and tweets. And apparently this is what goes on every year. It's called migration. Now, this is my question. Does this mean that there are no bison right now in Yellowstone? They're all going to migrate somewhere for the winter and they're coming back? I don't know. Is that what that means? You can wipe your brow and go, whew, okay, cool. Or is there something else to this? Does anybody really know? Is this what goes on? And so what I want to see, and I would love for this blogger, Jay Lee, to go back when the bison are returning to Yellowstone. Or is it the opposite? Or do they go to Yellowstone and then do they leave Yellowstone this time of year? I don't know. So there's enough of you out there listening that know. I don't. What's really going on? I tried to find out today, and I just couldn't get the info. It's really kind of strange. The video is bizarre, no doubt about it. And, the fear that we have with Yellowstone, the last time it blasted out, 640,000 years ago, nearly wiped out everything in the United States. And if it happens again, we're in for a lot of trouble. There's no doubt about it. It's a super volcano, one of the biggest, if not the biggest. And it's right here in the United States. And it's going to blow sooner or later. Do they know? Do these animals know something that we don't? It's probably nothing, but it's a crazy video. Have you seen the video, by the way, of President Clinton and Jimmy Kimmel Wednesday night? Our good old 42nd president was sitting there with Kimmel. They come back after a commercial break. I've watched it now like 3 times. It's actually pretty friggin' cool. And Kimmel goes, hey, man, something like, I'll paraphrase, if I was president and they swearing me into the Oval, the office, and I put my hand on the Bible before I even got done with the oath, I'd go and find out about UFOs. And I was like, no, he's going there. And he did. And it was funny how Clinton reacted. And I posted today, I don't think any president has ever said the words Roswell, Area 51, and Independence Day in the same conversation. But he did. And he said, yeah, I sort of wanted to check it out. So I asked for the records on Roswell, and I asked about Area 51, and I asked about alien bodies. That was pretty cool. And then he followed it up with, and if you haven't seen it, the video's posted on our Facebook page. I don't know if we have it up on the website. And the producers are listening to me right now. They'll probably get that video posted up on the website before the end of the show if you haven't seen it. Anyway, he says, Clinton, and I quote here, he goes, we know now we live in an ever-expanding universe. We know there are billions of stars and planets literally out there, and the universe is getting bigger. And if you saw him sitting there, he's motioning with his hands. We know from our fancy telescopes that just in the last 2 years, more than 20 planets have been identified. He's wrong. It's 1,000. It's actually 4,000. But and then he ends with saying, so it makes it increasingly likely that we're not alone. Oh, and Kimmel goes, oh, so you're trying to tell me there are aliens? And he goes, no, what I'm trying to tell you is we could be visited one day. And I loved it. Great video. We'll see if we can get that up before the end of the show. You got to check it out. Enceladus, the moon around Saturn, appears that it's got water. And it's got a lake the size of Lake Superior. And cop a visual of this for a second. Okay, you've got a little moon in front of you, little ball. On the bottom, on the South Pole, it's got an indent, like a dimple, but going inwards. That would be concave. And on the North Pole, on the top, it's covered in ice. It's thick. there is no water on the top. It's frozen solid. But they were able to take Cassini, run it past Enceladus a couple of times, Enceladus. And with gravity measurements, figure out that the ice on the bottom is about 10 to 15 miles thick, but below that is water. And it makes me just feel like Arthur C. Clarke got it so right. And if you think about it, it probably won't be Mars. It'll be some moon in our solar system that we live on next. Think about it. Wanted to share this story with you today. It's the Valentich disappearance. Now, I have a lot of things that when it comes to UFO stories and lore that I always find really interesting. And the ones that I find interesting are the ones that nobody talks about or nobody knows about. And this is one of those stories. And I have chased down the original newspaper articles from UPI on this story. It's crazy. It happened in 1978. And if you know the story, I'm going to refresh your memory. If you've never heard of it, and you probably haven't, you've got to go check it out. If you dig deep enough on the web, you can find out some information about this for yourself. The Valentich disappearance was the disappearance of a 20-year-old kid who wanted to, his name's Frederick Valentich, who wanted to become a commercial pilot. That was his goal in life. So he goes out and he gets a pilot's license, and he buys a Cessna 182 little plane. And he gets a certain amount of, instrument. He wanted to be able to fly at night. That was one of his things. He had failed all of the airline exams miserably, but he could be a, private pilot. So he's cruising around Australia, around Melbourne, and on a training flight. He's by himself. And this was on the 21st of October in 1978. And the craziest thing happened. He radioed Melbourne at 7:06 p.m. in the evening to report that an unidentified aircraft was following him at 4,500 feet. And they told him there was no traffic at that level. And Valentich responds back that he could see a large unknown aircraft, which appeared to be illuminated by 4 bright landing lights. Now, when you go, this is my writing here, but when you go and I can pull it up right now, when you go and find the original newspaper articles, which I found, you can actually read the quotes directly, and it's pretty crazy. Valentich said he could see a large unknown aircraft which appeared to be illuminated by these lights, and that he was unable to confirm what type of aircraft it was. He couldn't confirm its type, but he said that it passed him about 1,000 feet overhead and was moving at high speed. And this is all over the radio. And then he goes back and says that the aircraft was now approaching him, and said that the other pilot of this aircraft was messing with him, buzzing his aircraft. And then he said that it started orbiting around his plane, and he tried to turn his plane and tried to orbit and follow the UFO. And then he radioed back and said it's kind of like an oblong shape. And that was the last thing that he said. Well, no, there was one last thing. It isn't an aircraft. That was his last transmission. He was never found. They never found his plane. They never found him. The newspaper articles that you can find if you know what you're doing, and you can actually find the scans of the actual reports that were done by UPI, and these are the quotes from the recordings of the radio. Check this out. Quote, "It has 4 bright lights. It appears to be landing lights. Aircraft has just passed over me 1,000 feet above." End quote. Quote, "It isn't an aircraft. It's flying at a speed I cannot estimate. It is past. It is a long shape. Cannot identify more than that. Coming for me now. It seems to be stationary. I'm orbiting. The thing is orbiting on top of me also. It has a green light and sort of metallic light on the outside." And that's when his engine stalled. And they could hear that on the radio transmission. There was some kind of metallic scraping sound, and that was it. And it's a crazy story. One that has never been figured out. How it kind of ended was about 5 years later, a piece of engine cowling, that round or the section in front of the windshield that, covers the engine like a hood, the engine cowling, a piece of an engine cowling floated up on shore. It was 5 years later. They never confirmed if it was from his aircraft or not, but that's all that was found if it was from him. It's a crazy story. Valentich. Check it out. That's why you come here. You come here to learn something, don't you? This is about as crazy of a story as I can ever bring up on this show. X-Files creator Chris Carter has a new series coming out on Area 51. And it's going to be called, are you ready? Area 51. The network AMC has ordered it and officially putting it into development. It's from Chris Carter and The Walking Dead executive producer Gail Ann Hurd. Now, this is from the official release right here from AMC. It says, writer EP Chris Carter of The X-Files, EP Gail Ann Hurd, The Walking Dead. It's based on the New York Times bestseller Area 51, an uncensored story of America's top secret military base by Annie Jacobson. I wrote Annie today and told her I would be speaking about her on the show tonight. I'm going to try to get her on the show next week. It's a contemporary conspiracy thriller revealing the true story behind the infamous Area 51, America's most mysterious military installation. That's the end of the press release. But check this out. This is the crazy part. The book that this series is based on, and if you remember, the book got a little bit nutty. That's why we've got to have Annie on the show. And I'm sure she's going to, she writes for the LA Times and she's in town here. So I think we'll be able to get her on. Next week, she's doing a book signing here in LA on the 14th. So I'm hoping I can get her right before that. But her book, and I remember when it came out, she addresses the Roswell UFO incident and ties it into Area 51 with the aliens, but it's not the conventional story. Her book said, and I'm not kidding, this is what the book said, that Stalin had flown this UFO into the United States and that Joseph Mengele himself was recruited by the Soviets and Joseph Stalin to produce these grotesque, freaked out, small, childlike pilots. And that's a twisted thought right there. And that the craft was going to be radio controlled and flown across the United States to freak us out. That was the intention. Like Orson Welles kind of thing, War of the Worlds. But instead, the aircraft crashed in the desert. and those bodies were recovered. And that's what is at Area 51. Now, why would I bring this up? I really hope that that's not what Chris Carter is going to base this series on. I just hope. The Annie Jacobson version is a great story. It's fiction. It's okay, great. It's created. It's imagination. And apparently it was well written. The book was, was received okay. But this is in production, and we're going to have this on TV in about a year. And with Chris Carter, it's going to be no joke. It's going to be fantastic. It's going to be awesome. But Mengele and Stalin and alien baby pilots I don't know. But I'm excited. Chris Carter does it right. And this just seems a little wrong. And this is Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church. When I come back, it's going to be David Marler and the Black Triangle Special. Shoot us some email right now to Jimmy at jimmychurchradio.com. Twitter's already lighting up. Yep. Here we go. Jimmy at jimmychurchradio.com. Don't touch that mouse. I'll be back right after this. It's Fade to Black Friday, everybody. Hang on. Here we go.
You're listening to Jimmy Church Fade to Black on the Dark Matter Radio Network.
What's up, revolutionaries? It's me, Jimmy Church. Do you have an IRS or state tax issue? Well, I did, and I called national tax experts. My problems were fixed, done, fini, and man, I got to tell you, it was a relief. National Tax Experts are a recognized tax office that services clients in all 50 states. It doesn't matter where you live. Give them a call. I'm telling you, they take the time to understand each and every client's individual financial status as well as their financial goals. And that's exactly what you need, my brother, when you're taking on the evil three-letter. So, seriously, give them a call today at 1-877-909-5444. Again, 1-877-909-5444, or go check out their website, www.nattaxexperts.com. That's NATTAXEXPERTS.com. Tell them Jimmy sent you.
This is KJCR at JimmyChurchRadio.com
on the Dark Matter Radio Network.
All right, everybody. I'm going to run some more music until I get David on the line. Having problems connecting. So here we go. Just sit and enjoy some more Doug Aldrich until I'm back. I'll be back right after this with David Marler. Stay with us. All right, everybody, welcome back. KJCR. Fade to Black, Friday nights. Shoot us an email right now to Jimmy@jimmychurchradio.com. You can tweet at JChurchRadio. Right now, Mr. David Marler. I'm going to go ahead and cue the music, everybody. Okay, let's go. David Marler has had a lifelong interest in the subject of UFOs. He joined the Mutual UFO Network in 1990 as a field investigator trainee. Since then, he has served as field investigator, state section director, as well as Illinois state director. David is currently an independent UFO researcher. David has assisted the History Channel, Listening Channel, Discovery Channel on UFO documentaries, in addition to independent productions. David received his bachelor's degree in science and psychology from Southern Illinois University at Edwardsville. Go Cy-U. He has received his certification in hypnotherapy from Monton and Johnson Institute of Hypnosis in St. Louis, Missouri. I would like to welcome to the program, to Fade to Black, David Marler. David, are you with us, sir?
I am. Good evening, Jimmy.
Hey, sorry for the delay and the way that I brought you in. When we dialed your number, it said it wasn't in service. I said, that's impossible.
That's the NSA.
Yeah, the NSA. The NSA. Exactly right. Exactly. So I'm excited. It's going to be a great show. And we start off every show this way. And it's a Friday night. A nice big audience out there. And they're comfortable. Probably half of the world right now that is listening is late at night. They're in bed. The lights are dark. You know what I mean? And
absolutely.
And they're going to have a really good time. And so, you and I are just going to sit and talk and see where we take this thing tonight. And it's I've talked about it all week and last week that, everybody knows me. This is one of my favorite subjects, period. I think we brought up on the premiere last year. It was the first subject that Steve Murillo and I talked about. Steve Murillo, Steve, he used to be the director out here in L.A. of MUFON. And it was the first thing that we were talking about was black triangles. That's what got him. And, his first sighting was, black triangles. And that stuck with him. We've all seen them. I have. I've seen one. I've photographed it. And it is just one of those crazy subjects. And your book has been well received. Everybody loves it. And right now, you're that guy. you're the black triangle guy. And I don't know if you realized when you first spoke to Dolan, Richard, about this, that I don't know if you realized what you were, what kind of doors you were opening and what that was going to lead to. But
absolutely not.
It's been a crazy ride, I'm sure.
Obviously, my first book I've ever written, so I was somewhat naive entering into this whole project, but I felt it was a book that needed to be written. A lot of skeptics and cynics out there say, well, you just write UFO books to make money.
Yeah.
So I think you'll be hard-pressed to find any UFO author that's gotten rich off the subject, quite the contrary.
Exactly.
But I really felt a need, as you mentioned, to get the information out there because, as we had discussed earlier today, this is a subject that's at the forefront of ufology. Anyone that has any casual interest in the subject, I think, has come across these reports of these large, silent, dark, triangular objects.
Right.
And for me, what I found particularly interesting, and which really is the thrust of the book and the research, is the historical nature of these reports and the global distribution of these reports over the last several decades. And for people out there that are under the notion that this is some type of top-secret military aircraft, if we can establish that there is a rich history of reports, and I'm talking reports from the late 1800s all the way up to the present day, describing not only triangular-shaped objects, but lighting characteristics, flight dynamics that mirror reports that we're receiving today, then I think we're forced to conclude that we're dealing with something other than non-terrestrial technology. Not to say, and I always like to throw this caveat in, not to say that some triangular objects today may not, in fact, be something that was manufactured by a Department of Defense contractor.
Well, this is, there seems to be, and before, well, okay, we're kind of jumping ahead a little bit. I wanted to set the stage with a couple of, softball questions just to kind of, paint the picture as we move forward. But let's just jump into it. We've got a lot to talk about. There's almost two kinds of black triangles that, from what I see looking at, one of them is not aerodynamic and is not flying, with airfoils or some type of a shape to it, with square sides, slow, maybe fat, whatever, but it's not aerodynamic. It's not being held aloft because of atmosphere.
Absolutely.
Right. And then we have the other ones that look like they could be more of a terrestrial design, stealth fighter-ish.
If you see vertical stabilizers and things of that nature, then it is indicative or suggestive of man-made technology, and I would completely agree with you on that, making that distinction.
And then you're going to have the mistakes that fall into the middle, which from a distance you don't know what you're looking at. Leading edges, airfoils like we were just talking about, or square sides. You could be looking at a silhouette or whatever. From the bottom, and if you don't see a chemtrail or some kind of exhaust coming off of it, then really you don't know what you're looking at, and it doesn't look like it should be flying, but it could be terrestrial. So it kind of falls in the middle.
Well, and I think like anything in life, it's shades of gray that we're dealing with, even with regard to these large black triangles.
Yeah, exactly. So okay, now let's back up, and I'll ask the basic question here. Have you, as you were growing up, did you have an interest? Did your family have an interest in ufology, or was this something that, came to you in a different way? How did the fascination start off for you? And did you see anything?
Up front, that I've never had a sighting of a UFO in the sense that I saw an object that was clearly of non-terrestrial origin. I've seen lights, I've seen things of that nature, but things that I could readily explain away. So I've not had that close encounter that really was a catalyst for my interest in the subject. But my interest really started at the age of 5 years old, back in 1973. And for the listeners out there that might be familiar with this wave of sightings, in the area of Piedmont, Missouri, a small town in southeast Missouri, there was a wave of UFO sightings taking place, very dramatic. And I lived just outside St. Louis at the time, and it had garnered so much attention, not only by the public, but also by the media, especially in St. Louis, Missouri, that they were writing these newspaper articles, they were running segments on the local news channels. And, of course, I was 5 years old at the time, and I had the attention span of a normal 5-year-old. So it wasn't that really piqued my interest, but what happened was the original witness that really started that wave of sightings and the subsequent reports was a gentleman by the name of Reggie Bone, who was the basketball coach for the Piedmont, Missouri high school basketball team. He and a number of basketball team members were coming back from a game that they had lost one evening, and they observed a strange array of lights that were behaving in a very unusual manner. They pulled their vehicle over and observed this, and the object was slowly setting down and then abruptly took off at an oblique angle. And that was the initial sighting. Like so many other waves we hear about, it usually starts with one sighting and then you have subsequent sightings. What was of particular interest, though, was the fact that this man was my father's best friend when they were growing up as children.
Oh, really?
And when my father heard about this, living in St. Louis at the time, he basically stated, I knew Reggie growing up.
Yeah, what year was this again?
This was in 1973.
Wow.
And so garnered a lot of attention. I've got a huge case file now on that wave of sightings. But my father, because he knew Reggie and knew of some of the other people that had sightings shortly thereafter, he, along with many people from the St. Louis, Missouri area, were venturing down to Piedmont on weekends to, quote-unquote, look for UFOs. So I remember the excitement and the anticipation as my father and my older brothers and my sister were loading up the car with binoculars and thermoses of coffee to go sky watching.
Oh, how cool is that?
And so that was kind of my initial introduction to the UFO subject. And then, of course, not only the excitement when they left, but when they came back, they never actually observed any UFOs, but they would relay stories of people they had talked to in the area. And I was listening to the descriptions of their sightings through my siblings and through my father. And so that was my initial introduction to UFOs, and that was in 1973. 4 years later, in 1977, my sister and her husband were just outside Kansas City, Missouri, coming home late one evening around midnight, and they pulled up to an intersection, and it was a very quiet neighborhood. They were only about a mile or two from their home, and my sister was asleep in the car. Her husband was driving. My sister relays the story today. She woke up with her husband hitting her violently in the arm and screaming, "Cheryl, Cheryl, wake up, wake up." And her first conscious thought as she opened her eyes was, why is it daylight outside? And it was essentially, I hate to use this analogy, but it was essentially like the scene from Close Encounters where Roy Neary, the character Roy Neary, had the UFO right over the car. The car and the surrounding area was bathed in this intense, bright white light. And it stayed there for a while. Her husband looked out the driver's side window and could look up and see that there was something, for lack of a better term, hovering above the car silently. There was no wind displacement, and he could see multicolored lights affixed to, again, something above the car. Just as soon as the light turned on, in just a matter of seconds, the light immediately just disappeared. And they traveled home, and then over the years I would hear them relay that story. So that kind of reinforced my interest. And then 1 year later, we had another wave of sightings outside of St. Louis in an area called Ellsbury, Missouri, which is north of St. Louis on the Mississippi River. And that sighting generated a lot of interest. And, of course, by that time I was 10 years old, so I was a little bit older to where I could appreciate it a little bit more and understand a little bit more of what was going on. But local law enforcement, some of whom I'm good friends with today, and we still talk about the sightings, and not only sightings, but cattle mutilations occurring at that time in and around Ellsbury, Missouri. So I was hearing about those stories as well. So those were really the three pivotal episodes in my life that really, at a very early age, struck me as fascinating. And to this day, regardless of what you think of UFOs, when I talk to people, I find it hard how you cannot have some level of fascination with this subject, as I'm sure you can appreciate, Jimmy.
Yeah, well, and this is the other thing. In that part of the country, there's a couple of pretty large Air Force bases that were pretty active back then, too, which would, cause, the fascination of looking to the sky for all the residents there, who also know the difference between, a B-52 or, you know what I mean, Air Force.
Absolutely.
And it doesn't matter if you're a mom or a sister or, male, female, it doesn't matter. It's that you get acclimated with seeing, the Air Force flying around. And so you knew the difference, and certainly your dad did, and your dad's friend, because of that kind of activity, and especially back then in the United States, it was a lot more active than it is today.
Oh, yes, and 1973, of course, was a very busy year when you look at the statistics for UFO sightings in the United States. So Piedmont was just one aspect of that wave of sightings that was really sweeping the country at the time.
Well, when you just said, with the amount of stars, and if you're not, you have to. Appreciate that we're just not alone. And today, after that President Clinton video, I don't know if you caught that on Jimmy Kimmel, but it's fantastic, and you should, go watch it. But I went and pulled up a couple of stats, and that wrap your brain around this one, David. Check this out. There are over 300 billion stars in the Milky Way. Okay. 300 billion. And our galaxy is one of at least 100 billion galaxies in the universe.
I can't wrap my mind around those
I
numbers.
didn't think, and I was like, I guess that's right. That seems a little. So I double check, and then I went in and looked at what Kepler was, the most recent numbers on Kepler, and I pulled those numbers up, and which it's not as difficult to wrap your head around, but they've found 4,000, candidate planets and in our Milky Way, and about 1,000 of them have been confirmed as, Earth-like, really close, should be habitable kind of thing, possibilities for life. Okay, that's cool. But then I went back and thought about that for a second. 300 billion stars in our tiny little thing, just our little thing, which from the other side of the universe, we just look like a star to them, the Milky Way. Just like, all of the galaxies look like stars to us, from Kepler. Yeah, exactly. And to think that there's 100 billion Milky Ways, 100 billion, with 300 billion stars inside of each one of those. No, we are not alone.
It makes me feel very small.
Yeah, very small. Oh, and we are not alone. There's just no way, and it was comforting to hear, somebody like Bill Clinton today to go, hey, seriously, it wouldn't surprise me if, they did a drive-by tomorrow. And yeah, so, okay, now why this book at this time, though? And before you answer,
okay,
when we had Dolan on the show last month, I got to tell you, we talked about you both on and off the air, and I don't want you to feel uncomfortable about that. It was good, but he was very, very, very excited, and he turned to me on the air and goes, you've got to get, Marlar on the show. And I said, I've already reached out to him. He didn't, he didn't realize. But anyway, the professionals in this industry have really embraced this book. And so why now? And I mean, there was a catalyst behind it because you started writing the book before you met Richard. And you know what I mean? And in fact, the book wasn't even finished when you first went on his show. So
it was an interesting sequence of events. A mutual friend of ours, Sam Moranto, who's the Illinois MUFON state director, I believe it was I'm trying to remember now. I believe it was January of 2012, was having a conversation with Richard, and Richard was commenting, I realized I need to have a guest on my show this weekend. I'm trying to figure out who to fill that slot with. And, of course, Sam, who I had just talked to just the day before, said, well, David Marlar's writing a book, don't you? And he goes, Dave, he's writing a book? About what? And he said, well, the history of triangular UFOs. He goes, you're kidding. So he goes, I'm going to call him. And, of course, for anyone that knows Richard, like yourself, Jimmy, I mean, he's just a ball of energy. And he contacted me and was extremely excited and I started sharing some of my preliminary research with him. And he goes, this is all fascinating. He goes, I got to have you on the show. He goes, I got to have you on the show. And so one thing led to another. And basically on his radio show, although we had talked about it briefly right before we went on air, he pretty much offered to publish the book, Sight Unseen, just based on the preliminary information I had shared. I only had about maybe half of the book written at that point, and then it was published June 28th of last year. And I might add, at his urging, as I mentioned to you earlier today, Jimmy, I was really trying to get everything just right, but I kept getting calls from Richard, and he's like, is the book ready? Can we go to print? Are we going to be ready by the end of the month? And so he was more excited, as I've told people, than myself in getting this book published, which was really humbling because not having written a book, for anyone that is out there in the process of writing their first book, whether it's UFOs or otherwise, you're always writing this book, investing this time and this effort, and asking yourself, I hope at the end of the day, someone's going to find this worthy enough to publish.
Right.
I had the luxury of having a publisher quite literally waiting in the wings, ready to publish this book. So it took a huge weight off my shoulder in that respect.
Exactly. And the thing is with Richard, you're not dealing with, a huge corporation that publishes by committee, and editor after editor, and it could take forever. You could finish the book and it may not even get to print for forever.
Well,
but with Richard, well, check. This is what, because he wanted to get that out there, and he can do that. He has that ability. When I talked to him on the phone, I hope he doesn't mind me saying this, but I'm going to do it anyway. About a month before he came on the show, so this is probably about 3 months ago. We're just having a little chit chat in the middle of the day, and he goes, "Well, Jimmy, I can't come on the show because I'm just finishing the notes in my book. So as soon as I finish the notes, then we're going to go to print next week, and then I can come on the show. But right now, I'm just, and I was just thinking to myself, wait a minute, you're not even finished writing the book, but you're going to go to print next week, and that's phenomenal. That's I mean, that's because he owns the company and he can do
Absolutely.
that. And was it intimidating for you to go to somebody, with his kind of knowledge that you're going to, it's kind of like dropping your pants, isn't it?
Well, it is. And to be honest with you, in the interest of full disclosure, Richard has always been one of my leading researchers as far as credibility, as far as, his tenacity, his level of detail in the writing of his books. And just the other day, I was sitting here thinking to myself that what's really interesting is the fact that Richard's passion is the history of ufology. And with my book, it really is a historical book. It's following the history of sightings and establishing, the validity of this phenomenon, not so much from a scientific argument. I wouldn't say it's a scientific argument, but from a historical argument. So in that sense, it really parallels the work that Richard has done with the UFO phenomenon at large. So I think we both share that passion for history and documenting history and putting it in the proper context. Because when you look at these individual cases, these disparate cases, they don't make much sense. But what I hope to convey in the book was that there are patterns and there is consistency in the reports. And as I've stated before, no one UFO case exists in a vacuum. I mean, that's great that we focus as investigators on a particular case until we've gathered all the information.
Right.
But then once we've closed that case, let's do a comparative analysis. What does this case match in the annals of UFO history? What other cases do we have on file that might bear striking similarities to this? And the triangular UFOs, and again, I was naive. I thought I might find a few little parallels here or there. I was amazed, as I think Richard was, and I think many of the readers from the feedback I've received have been amazed at the consistency and the patterns that in fact have emerged as a result of really looking at this subset of UFOs, because the myriad of UFO books that have been published over the decades, with certain exceptions, of course, really kind of take the phenomenon, kind of grab everything and throw it against the wall. You'll find UFO books that are dealing with sightings, dealing with abductions, dealing with cattle mutilations, dealing with government conspiracy. And sometimes, certain UFO authors, for better or worse, just kind of take it all and throw it against the wall. What I wanted to do is really take laser focus, not just on UFO sightings, but specifically these triangular UFO reports, mainly because of their increased prevalence, and try to disparage some of the ideas that are being put forth on the internet and elsewhere that this is just all military aircraft. Because, again, if we can establish there's a rich history going back to the early 20th century or even the late 19th century, I think if you can establish that and have it well documented through newspaper archives, military reports, etc., then I think we're forced to conclude that we're dealing with something else. Now, what that is, I don't know. As I've stated in other interviews, I have no grandiose illusions that I've found the answer to the UFO phenomenon, but what I hope I've done in the course of documenting this material is help refine the question. And really, all of us individually, all of your listeners, have to really develop their own opinion regarding the subject. And I just gave a lecture recently here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I left that with the audience. I said, really, at the end of the day, each one of you have to arrive at your own conclusions. I'm simply presenting the evidence, the information.
Well,
but it's been a fascinating subset of the UFO phenomenon to study.
And we're all familiar with, what happened in Belgium. And not only, are we, it's because it's also fairly recent history, and it's very modern, and documented. And the way the government handled it there, I wish that, every government approached the subject the way that they did. I mean, they were very
agree.
tenacious. But so putting that aside, what is the early, take us back. I mean, was there anything going back to the Renaissance or before? Was anything, extremely historical that where black triangles were, what's the earliest sighting that you uncovered?
Well, as you can appreciate, the further you go back in history, the more sketchy the documentation is. And I really didn't want to go back too far back. There's some German woodcuttings that depict, dark triangular objects, but not much in the way really of explanation or documentation. The one that I really kind of started with, mainly because it was before Kitty Hawk and powered flight, was a report that was documented by Charles Fort, and it was from July 3rd, 1882. And it described that some astronomers had seen two triangular objects moving over the moon's surface. And it was very interesting in the sense that they were seen to approach each other, meet, and then instantly disappear. And they stated that the objects were very large to the point where it was almost obscuring a quarter of the moon's surface. So this is an early report, and what's interesting is it's not a close sighting, quite the contrary. It's
right.
being seen moving over the moon's surface. And then, of course, later I found references to the late 19th century. And of all places, and I had read this years ago when I first got actively involved in ufology back in 1990, but in doing a cursory review of all of the material, Donald Keyhoe, in his first landmark book, The Flying Saucers Are Real, back in 1950, he documented a wave of sightings that occurred in 1890, and these were seen over the Dutch East Indies, and they described large aerial bodies, and they stated that they were roughly triangular, about 100 feet on the base and 200 feet on the sides. And for the listeners that are keeping up with the triangular UFOs, that scale, that size, matches very closely modern-day reports
that we're
receiving today.
Yep, it sure does. Who was the? Oh man, I can't believe I'm brain freezing right now. The sighting that happened in 1951, 52 in Phoenix, and the two photographs that were taken and confiscated by
Carl Rhodes.
Yeah, Carl Rhodes. There you go.
Case.
Yes,
that's great you brought it up because so many people don't appreciate some of those older cases. That's actually one of my favorite photographic cases.
Yep, and I still have. We have those pictures up on our site somewhere, but we talked about that at length one time, and I'm just looking like that's like a black that is the classic black triangle photograph.
It is.
And
it's probably one of the earliest photographic cases we have on file, but. Very interesting case, and one that I haven't really heard anybody poke any holes into as far as, a hoax or anything of that nature.
Well, it wasn't, you know what? It wasn't the skeptics or the debunkers out there that tried to discredit and hoax that picture. It was the Air Force of, in the Army themselves that tried to, call him crazy and a mad scientist and, did everything they could to try to make him look like he was Looney Tunes. I kind of felt bad for the guy.
That was just the beginning, right? After that, they continued to move forward with that same methodology.
Yeah, that was the beginning. Yeah, well, that was it. That was the method of operation right there. SOP started in Phoenix. So
that was an interesting case.
It was. It's one of the best. Okay, so I want to get everybody warmed up. You know what to do. Go over to jimmychurchradio.com and scroll down on the homepage. And David, I'm sure you're doing the same. We've got your gallery up, and it's in its normal guest position at jimmychurchradio.com. We've got, you sent us a bunch of really cool stuff. 1, 2, 3, it looks like 14 images here. Now, what I like about this, when I asked a guest to, send us really interesting stuff for the audience to follow with the show, it's always cool. It is. But this right here, which you sent, is what I would like to have seen. This is actually, I'm a black and white guy.
Yeah.
And that's what your book is, and that's what this gallery is today. So I thoroughly enjoyed this. Now I'm hoping you have it open. I don't know if you have these in any particular order.
Well, I was going to say I'm actually on the page, but I'm not seeing the images currently.
Okay, so just scroll.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, there you go.
There we are.
Okay, so these are in the order that you sent them to us.
Okay.
So I don't know if they're in any particular order, but
Not really.
Okay.
It's kind of a mixture of the historical record as I've been able to uncover. And obviously, what we have here and what's in the book is really just the tip of the iceberg as far as some of the cases that I've come across. These are some of the, I thought, the more intriguing cases.
Absolutely. Which one is the oldest case?
Let me see here. Looks like the oldest case, I believe, is... I'm trying to remember here. I don't have the years attached.
I was thinking it was going to be the first one, but it's not.
The first one, actually, that large triangular object you see there?
Yep.
That's actually a case from 1977 in Memphis, Tennessee, and that was observed by multiple police officers. Interesting thing about that, much like the January 5th, 2000 case that we can talk about later that involved police officers, these officers were in radio contact with each other, and the one group that thought they had initially seen it radioed in, and another group of police officers from a different precinct in Memphis called in, and they said, the object you're looking at, is it triangular? And the officer in the newspaper interview stated, we knew at that point they had seen the same thing we did, because up until that point, we did not describe the shape of the object.
Wow. And
it was observed by multiple individuals. But one of the earliest cases we actually have is towards the top, the second from the right. That was the L.A. Times, out in your area there. And this was a daylight sighting of a triangular UFO. And I love some of the headlines. Now it's flying triangle, strange object seen in La Crescenta skies.
La Crescenta? Okay, hold on for a second. Let's let everybody follow us. Which one are you on? Are you in the third one in the top row? Third from the left?
I'm looking at the second from the right.
Second from the right. Okay. Oh, we got two LA sightings here. Oh, okay. All right, so let's go to this one, and this is from 1950?
1950.
In La Crescenta? Okay. Now, I want you to tell me about this, but before we get there, La Crescenta is where NASA is, JPL, just so you know. So the Jet Propulsion Laboratories, right there by the Rose Bowl, that sits in this little valley. Not from the studio here, it's 5-6 miles from here, but La Crescenta is a mountainous, hilly community, forested, nice, upscale, very upscale, not very populated. And then when you continue in towards Pasadena, that's when, right at the edge there of La Crescenta, is the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. It's right there. It takes up a huge chunk of that valley. So for this to happen and be seen, I want everybody to understand that this was seen above JPL, and that's pretty nutty. Okay, so take us through this. It's actually short enough to read the whole article, isn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty brief. Basically, a woman by the name of Ruby Lytle contacted the local law enforcement there and described a slow-moving object flying north, and described it as light-colored with a gondola-shaped body attached. And a police officer also saw it and described it, relatively between 5,000 and 10,000 feet up. But it was interesting because she described it as the size of a large plane, and there was no sound of any engine. And I included that because it's a rare example of a triangular UFO. And more importantly, I thought it was rather interesting, just the headline there, now it's flying triangle.
Yeah.
But it's just one example, and we do have others that were, of course, the majority of these are often seen at night or close to, the sunset. But this was during daylight hours, and it was an early report of a flying triangle. As I was going through the newspaper archives, I obviously that headline caught my attention.
In 1950,
yeah,
they actually, I like this quote here, but she didn't notice any spacemen aboard. but there was no sound of any engine. Wow, really? Okay, now, and I want our producers to, if they're listening to me right now, and I want them to notice in this article, it was at 2522 Montrose Avenue. We were at, I think, 2519 Montrose Avenue about 2 weeks ago up in La Crescenta. No joke. No
What are
joke.
the odds?
That is pretty trippy. Yeah, Montrose Avenue is the main street that goes through Montrose. Montrose is a little, I'm going to guess and say maybe 2,000 people, maybe. But you would consider it either La Crescenta or Pasadena. You know, it's just but it's up in the hills. And Montrose is the little street, Montrose Ave, that runs, it's the main drag. So she must have
there, right?
Well, yeah. She must have been in an apartment because that's what's on that street. It wouldn't have been a house, I don't think. But yeah, what a trip! That's right there, JPL. JPL is on the next block. Yeah, that's crazy.
Of all reports we pull up, we pull that one up.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. That really is. And if you go. And everybody's listening right now. We have the ability to do this in real time. Go to Google Maps, do 2522 Montrose Avenue, watch what pops up, and then look where JPL is. It's right there, man. It's right there. Okay, let's go to because I kind of did it in advance. Let's go to this other LA sighting from 1960. Can we do that? The third one from the left in the top row.
Once my computer cooperates, we'll be fine.
Okay, well, I hope, Los Angeles is excited over mystery object in the morning sky. Triangle spaceship is sighted. And this is what's funny. And in your research, and I bring this up often enough, but you're the guy. Even though we still see, the classic flying saucer or other types of shapes too as well. Today, but certainly a change happened. There was a changing of the guard somewhere in 1950, end of the 50s, 60s, and then somewhere in the 70s, this crossover started, and it just seems like today the fashion statement is triangle. Well, and I'm not saying that because. I'm trying to be funny.
No,
but,
not at all.
But it's what I've seen. It's what I've witnessed too. So what do you have any ideas of what's going on? Is it?
I have no idea. But what's interesting is we've seen that increase in frequency, certainly. But what's amazing is when we go back to these old newspaper articles, it's like almost as if they were always there, but in the background. And all of a sudden now, to your point, Jimmy, we're seeing this huge influx of reports of these triangular UFOs. And to your point, I really can't answer the question. I'm more really paraphrasing your question. Why now the sudden prevalence? And my argument, and this is something I said at my lecture recently here in Albuquerque, if these triangular-shaped UFOs are increasing in frequency and that trend continues, where is this all leading? Is it building up to something? What is the end result of this?
Yeah.
And where are we all headed as a collective society in dealing with this phenomenon?
Check this out. And I know my brain is perverted, and this is it's twisted. But with all of those movies, Earth versus the Flying Saucers, right? Mm-hmm. Whatever, Day the Earth Stood Still. You can get, you can have the hundreds of movies out there like that, if not thousands, all flying saucers. So, and people are seeing flying saucers in the air. Okay, you can make that correlation. But I haven't seen myself, I don't think, a movie with black triangles in it. In that the mass society hasn't had that, burned into their brains.
Right, that societal influence that might skew you into believing you've seen a triangular UFO. And that's a great point you bring up, and one I actually talk about in the book. A lot of skeptics, when the triangles really started to gain prominence in the UFO literature, some of the skeptics were making comments that, well, people are watching the X-Files or Dark Skies on television and they're seeing triangular UFOs.
Right.
To your point, on the big screen, you really didn't see it, but on some of the television programs in the early 90s, you did. But I use that as an example. Like the flying saucer movies of the 50s, we need to look back at the history. And obviously, we're looking at these old reports from the 1950s and 60s of triangular UFOs. The reports came before the television programs, just as we know, Jimmy, having looked at the history of ufology and UFO reports, the UFOs came first, the movies followed.
That's right. That's absolutely right. But with, okay, hold on. This question just came in, and it's actually excellent. So came in via email from Demian, I think, is how you would say your name. I always noted that most UFOs and ETs seem to follow an observe and evade tactic. Relating to this to Michio Kaku's theory of stage 1 through 3 civilizations, which predicts that based on our technologies that we will blow ourselves up. Do you think that for civilization to evolve to their status of technology, that they may have begun with such an agreement to have a superior defense rather than offense, and to keep distant, in a sense, from other civilizations? Huh. That's a good question, actually. Yeah. Wow, that's not your traditional. Okay. Well, I mean, you want to take a stab at that? Because
I basically find that plausible.
So do I.
I don't have a problem with that at all. The one thing that I find with mainstream scientists regarding the UFO subject, and even along the vein of what we were just discussing, what you were just reading, is the fact that we have to get over our human arrogance. We think that we're the pinnacle of creation, and I think, to your point earlier, Jimmy, as you were illustrating based on the numbers of stars and galaxies out there, that we're just one small speck in an infinite universe. And I think once we realize that, what was just sent in certainly makes sense.
Well,
certainly not the pinnacle, and I'm sure, based on the mathematics, I'm sure based on the age of our planet and the age of our star, relative to older stars and older planets, that we're a few rungs down the ladder, so to speak, as far as technology and evolution is concerned.
I like the way that even though we tend to be a little bit violent on this planet against ourselves, it's just the way that it is. But we are not, as far as I know, when we are sending probes to like Cassini, for instance, that's out near Saturn right now. But all the Mars landers, and we went to the moon. We got Pioneer and Voyager and as far as I know, there isn't any guns, on any of our probes that are going out. We're not looking to have a shoot 'em up in case we, come across, some form of life out there.
Right.
And why would we expect? I understand it makes a great movie. It makes a great book. I have no problem with that, and we always win in the end, so that's cool. But why would we expect somebody to come here and want to shoot them up with us?
Right.
Now, having defensive in nature, if they were getting shot at and maybe not shoot back, that would be superior intelligence.
Well, it would make sense, assuming that they know that despite our smartphones, despite our jet aircraft, we're still, and again, this has to get back to just having a certain level of humility. If we're dealing with an advanced society that is making contact with us or observing us, I hate to tell the audience this, but really, despite our technology, we're still engaged in basic tribal warfare.
Yep. Hey.
Whether it's politically generated, whether it's religiously generated, when you really are viewing us from the outside, truly from an objective standpoint, we really haven't changed that much. We're still trying to move the boundaries on the maps as far as various countries. Of course, Putin now is engaged in that.
Yep.
And then, of course, religious strife across the world, which, goes back to biblical times and even before.
And we're doing it today.
To be a Debbie Downer, but if there is an advanced society looking at us, we really haven't changed our behaviors.
Absolutely not.
We've just simply refined our ways of killing each other.
Yeah, that's my point. We may be doing that here, but we're not doing. We're not looking to engage
No.
elsewhere in the solar system or the universe, and so why would we expect that? And I know for some reason I just have this big fuzzy heart when it comes to that kind of stuff like that. I just don't think they would go there. I really believe that. I really do. And if they chose not to go, I mean, if they really wanted to, well, then then it's over. It would be over quickly.
And that's I was just going to say, I think that is really what underscores your position, is the fact that if that was their intent, whoever they are, we wouldn't be here talking right now.
Right. They get it done. That's what I'm saying. That's it. We would not be doing this show. All right. I wanted to say real quick, but I want to jump. Let's do this other L.A. Triangle story.
Okay.
And then I'm going to show you that picture of Texas that we were talking about earlier today. Okay, so you have it open. Triangle spaceship is sighted. Los Angeles is excited over mystery object in the morning sky.
And what's fascinating about this one, Jimmy, is the headline, Triangle Spaceship.
Right there.
And what's interesting, and we can talk about this later because it's a story unto itself, there was a wave of sightings in Denmark starting in 1957 into 1958 that was documented in the newspapers of the time that I completely illustrate in the book. And it's interesting because in their newspapers in Denmark, they weren't describing them as flying saucers. They stated in the articles triangular spaceships.
Wow.
Which I think is interesting. And when we compare it to this article from 1960 in California, I think that's interesting as well. Triangle spaceship, not flying saucer, not UFO, but triangle spaceship is sighted. So I found that very interesting. Now, you mentioned the facility from the one from 1950 that UFO was hovering close to. If you look at this article, this UFO was hovering about 300 to 400 feet above the Douglas aircraft plant in Santa Monica.
Oh, okay.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, the Douglas aircraft plant used to be over in between LAX and Santa Monica. So yeah, that's right there on the water, right next to LAX, right at the edge of Los Angeles. Actually, it's all one big city. But if it was seen there, that is a big chunk of population as far as LA goes. Mm-hmm. Okay, so then what happened? This was in the morning.
This was in the morning, and the desk officer there, Don Anderson, with the West Los Angeles Police Department, received the call, and several other people had also called about it, and the officer went outside and was a witness to the object as well, and described it as, the article states there, a triangular-shaped dark object, and traveling in a northeasterly direction about 1,000 feet at a slow rate of speed, which, again, you compare that to modern-day reports.
Right.
We often hear these UFOs, these triangular UFOs, are an estimated, and again, it's an estimate, 500 to 1,000 feet altitude typically, and moving at a slow rate of speed.
I like the way
what's interesting is it's described as a dark object.
Right.
Most weather balloons, most atmospheric balloons, often are reflective or semi-transparent.
That's right.
And this is described as a triangular dark object.
Well, he also, a spokesman from the Douglas plant said, "We make nothing fitting this description." Wow.
And it goes on to state that a small weather balloon.
Yeah. I see that.
Each morning about that time, which is interesting because you look at that, it's like here's the ubiquitous weather balloon explanation, right?
Right.
But what's interesting is they state that it's released each morning about that time.
Right. So they know the difference.
They should know the difference.
Right.
If they're launching these every morning, then why all of a sudden on this morning did this flurry of reports pour in if all of these people that live in that area are used to seeing those launched every morning?
Now, it also goes on to say, and I'm going to help everybody out here again so you understand logistically what's taking place here. It says that it traveled northeast. So when northeast from Santa Monica, if you go northeast and draw a line, guess where you end up? La Crescenta. And you go right over Pasadena and right over the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, over the mountains. And then if you kept going straight, you would end up in the Mojave Desert out there by Edwards Air Force Base. And and the Mojave Desert. And if you continue going from there, you end up at Area 51. That's a whole nother story. But Northeast takes you up across Los Angeles and then eventually over the Santa Monica Mountains and then over the studio here and then over to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory.
You didn't realize we were going to be talking not only about historical cases, but cases from your area.
Well, this is the thing. And we were talking about this earlier tonight. And you know what? After the show tonight, I promise everybody out there, I've gotten enough email about it, I will scan the pictures that I took up in Monterey. And I've only had, David, I've seen 3 things in my life that I can't explain. 2 of those, all 3, I was with other people. There's multiple witnesses. Mm-hmm. One, I can maybe explain that it was a satellite. It was in the middle of the day that was positioning itself up in the way, way, way upper atmosphere. But it was in the middle of the day, cloudless sky, bright blue. It was not that long ago, 6 months ago. And it was spinning, and we watched it for about a half hour move across the sky. I don't know how far of a distance, but move across the sky, then stop right above us, and you could see it slightly spinning. I'm guessing 100,000 feet. I don't know, 200,000 feet. I don't know. But it was floating, so it was something up there, and then it went straight up and then disappeared out of the atmosphere till you couldn't see it anymore. Could have been a satellite positioning itself. I don't know, but that was pretty trippy. And then the other thing that we saw was my wife and I one night in the car. This bright flash of light came down, streaked in front of our windshield over here by La Crescenta. We were coming from La Crescenta, coming back down into the valley. And it landed, it went down into downtown Van Nuys, and I thought it was going to explode, but it didn't, and that was the trippy thing. But anyway, so there was that sighting. There's more to it than that, but not that big of a deal. But the Black Triangle was up in Monterey, and I was with 3 friends. There were 4 of us, and we were riding bikes going up the coast. We were going to go to Pebble Beach, where the golf course is on the coast. And we stopped 2 or 3 times. We had little portable, disposable film cameras. This was 1995, 1996, something like that. And my 3 friends were out in ankle-deep water with their backs would be facing west. And I'm taking pictures of them. We were taking turns, right, taking pictures of us. So it was my turn with the camera. And one of my friends pointed to the sky as I'm getting ready to pull the trigger, and he goes, "Dude, what's that?" And I stopped and I looked, and it was this black dot scooting across the sky, way, 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 way high up in the clouds. But it was a little pinprick, but it was hauling balls, right? And it just didn't even look right. Planes at that altitude move very, very slow, and I don't care if they're doing Mach 3. They're moving slow. And I take my camera and I point it in the general direction of what's going on. I can't really see it because it's so tiny, but I snap a picture, and then I take the camera down. I got to wind it, right? I'm winding it with my thumb, and I look up again to see where it's at. And as I look up, it stopped. And it was streaking across the sky. It stopped, and I was like, "Whoa!" And as I went to go put the camera up to my eye, it just went pew, right into the clouds and went straight up. And you could see behind the cloud, it kept going, and then went out and was gone into the atmosphere. And this was like 4 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Daylight sighting.
Yeah. Now this is the trippy part.
Mm-hmm.
We continue taking pictures. We split. We go up the coast. We go to Pebble Beach. We have a couple of beers. We go to the driving range. And then we pedal back on these bikes to Monterey. Day's done. We didn't even talk about it. We forgot about it. And it was months later. And I'm at my house in Sherman Oaks. And I go and I grab all of this film. I had a big fistful of like 10, 20 rolls of 35 millimeter film. I take it up to the drugstore, 1 hour, processing.
Mm-hmm.
I get the stuff back, and I'm at my house, and I'm flipping through the pictures. This is a keeper. This one's not. This is a keeper. This one's not. This is a cloud. Why did I take a picture of a cloud? And I'm holding the thing, and I go, oh, that black dot. So I go and I run, and then I see the black dot, right? It's right there. I go and I get my jeweler's loop. And I'm a big watch guy, so jeweler's loop. And I pop it on the picture, and I look, and it's a friggin' pyramid. Mm. It's a black, not a triangle. Mm-hmm. It's a pyramid. It's flying in the wrong direction, like the flat side going forward kind of thing. It didn't make any sense. And I'm looking at it, and I'm like, what the heck? So that's it. So anyway, I'm not going to tell the rest of the story. You're the guest. But no, I'm going to scan this tonight, and I'm going to send to you the picture, and we'll get it posted up on the website. I haven't scanned it. I just keep forgetting about it every day, and everybody asks me about it. So I'll scan it today, and then everybody can just tell me I'm full of baloney.
No.
Somebody's going to figure it out.
I'm glad you brought that up, Jimmy. One, I hadn't heard of your sighting until then, but more specifically, what you just described, as far as the flat side as the leading edge,
right,
is a common characteristic that weaves throughout these triangular UFO reports. In fact, if we can go back to the pictures online,
right,
the second row, and it would be the middle picture there. If you hover over it, or if the listeners hover over that, Woodstock, Connecticut from 1967.
Got it. I just opened it.
This is from Air Force Project Blue Book files, and the sketch is obviously crude. But as you can see, what the witness indicated and what they described in their eyewitness report was that the flat side of the triangle was the leading edge. And you can see the direction of movement that the eyewitness indicated in their sketch.
Check that out.
And this is 1967.
Wow.
That's one of the common I've been able to identify 20 common characteristics that seem to be relatively consistent in this body of reports, this being one of them. And this is one that I enlisted the input from Professor John Allen, who's a retired British aerospace engineer. He's been involved with aviation since the Battle of Britain. So he's seen the evolution of conventional aircraft, shall we say, over the last several decades. And I do an extensive interview with him, and I mentioned the fact that these objects move in that fashion, and he stated matter-of-factly that makes absolutely no sense from a conventional aerodynamic standpoint, which is suggestive of the fact that these objects are obviously not propelled using conventional jet propulsion.
Exactly.
And I've had some conversations with other aviation experts. In fact, there's one gentleman who purchased my book and contacted me, one of many people that have been able to contact me as a result of having my book and my contact information out there. He's a retired Boeing engineer, and he wants to meet with me the next time I'm in the city where he lives, because he's a 35-year veteran of aviation design and engineering, and he has some interesting theories as relates to the possible propulsion technologies by which these objects might move. So I'm looking forward to meeting with him. And he was, in fact, a colleague of another aviation expert that I interviewed right before he passed away, unfortunately, last year, and that was Dr. Paul Ziss, who was affiliated with McDonnell Douglas Aircraft Company. And he was the aviation expert, local aviation expert in the St. Louis, Missouri area, who was contacted by media right after the famous January 5th, 2000 sighting by Illinois police officers.
I was just going to bring that up. Okay,
go
ahead.
I was the lead investigator on. And that was really, you mentioned the Belgian wave from 89 to 91. That was what really captured my interest initially, like many people, with regard to this subset of UFOs. But that was more from an academic standpoint, just reading about it, studying the reports, etc. But then roughly 10 years later, January 5th, 2000, then I was confronted firsthand with a very dramatic sighting of a large triangular UFO. And so it's one thing to read about these reports, and now suddenly I'm immersed in investigating this, what turned out to be a landmark case.
Extremely landmark. And not only the thing is about that Illinois case, and I'm glad that we can discuss that openly because you were the investigator on the case.
Mm-hmm.
But it's one thing to have civilian witnesses, and I think that is some of the most compelling. That's some of the best eyewitness because they don't have anything to fear.
No, not at all.
when you have somebody in the service or a pilot or a cop, they speak up. They don't have a job anymore, and so there's issues with that. But when you have those police officers tell the story and the description, and they are radioing back to dispatch, and you know the case better than I do, but I've studied it as much as I can. It is one of the strongest cases. Period.
It is.
So,
and
how were you contacted? Okay, let's please take me through this. Now, I'm guessing, but is this no? That's Papasco State. Okay. Oh, well, you know what's funny? This Patapsco State drawing, right?
Very similar to the January 5th.
It is, isn't it? I'm looking at the back windows here.
Which is what the initial witness described.
Right.
The object that morning.
Okay, so this isn't from Illinois, but it's okay. So actually, we'll talk about that in a second. How were you contacted? Take us through that case.
Okay.
And yeah, I've got a million questions, so let's just go.
Well, in a nutshell, we'll try to sum it up quickly because there's a lot of different avenues we can pursue after we lay out the details. But January 5th, 2000, very cold, clear morning in southern Illinois. Approximately 4 a.m., a gentleman who owns a miniature golf course and family fun time center during the off season, January.
Right.
He obviously doesn't have his family fun time center open, but he does over the road truck driving as a sideline job. He came home to Highland, Illinois, after an over the road delivery, and came back. And because the temperatures were so cold that morning, he wanted to stop by his facility just to make sure that the pipes hadn't froze or burst. So as he exited his truck, he happened to catch out of the corner of his eye this very bright white light.
And this was like 4 o'clock in the morning. This is like
4 o'clock in the morning.
Right. Okay.
And he noticed this very bright white light in the northeast sky. Just looked at it for a second, really didn't give it a second thought, and proceeded into the building, checked the pipes, everything was fine. And as he exited the building and was going for his truck, he just happened to look over again to see if he could still see that light. He noticed the light, but what he noticed was it seemed to be larger, and he stood there for just a matter of seconds and realized this light was moving. He stood there, and in just a matter of seconds, the light was now moving to the south of his position, just over a row of trees that lined the back of his family's fun time miniature golf course. And as the light moved to the south, he realized it was not just a light, that the light was in fact affixed to the front of something in the sky. And he described windows on the side, described red lights, an array of red lights on the bottom of the object. And then as the object apparently moved from a northeast to southwest trajectory, he noticed windows in the back of the object that had these vertical bars. And he watched it until he lost sight of it to the southwest. And I always commend him for having the peace of mind to do what he just did next, because really he's the hero of the story. And I've lectured on this case since 2000, and I always say he's really the hero of the story.
Why is that?
He is really what set the subsequent sequence of events in motion. He had the forethought to immediately drive to the local police department and report what he saw. And he requested that the dispatcher contact neighboring Lebanon, Illinois, which is to the southwest from Highland, and see if the police officer that's on duty could see this object, because whatever it was heading his direction. And the local police dispatcher contacted the St. Clair County Dispatch, which then contacted Officer Ed Barton with the Lebanon Police Department. Jokingly, and he's unfortunately passed away since then, but he had a great sense of humor. It was a pleasure interviewing him at the police station on a number of occasions. But he stated, if I happen to find it, what am I supposed to do with it? Which really gives you some insight into the fact he had a great sense of humor.
Right.
But he radioed in and stated after a short time that he saw some very bright lights east of town, and he put on his overhead lights and proceeded to hightail it to the east end of Lebanon. He then noticed that there were two bright lights, which were then moving off to the east of his location. And now, mind you, he's taking these country roads and getting on various roads to try to keep up with the object or close on the object. He finally got on an area called Old Route 50, which is just on the east side of Lebanon, and pulled his squad car over and got out, turned the engine off. An important little aspect, he turned the engine off, and it's a very rural area. And I mean this quite literally. You could hear a pin drop. So he's standing there next to his squad car, clear skies, silent, and then he notices this object, what appears to now be an object, moving almost overhead. And then he sees this triangular object with bright lights on each point, a red light in the center, and of course we're kind of familiar now with that lighting array from other reports.
Mm-hmm.
He watches this object turn, and this is another characteristic that plays out over the decades. The object did not bank like a conventional aircraft. It moved very slowly toward him, then made a flat turn to the point where it was now pointing to the southwest. He reached in his squad car to radio the dispatch, because he said his personal communicator that they wear on their uniform is sometimes not as reliable as their CB in the car. So he reached in to get the radio microphone to radio the dispatch. Just from leaning into his car, grabbing the microphone and coming forward, the object that was hovering almost overhead was now streaking. He barely caught a glimpse of it streaking to the southwest. And he states to the dispatcher, whatever it is, it apparently is headed towards Scott Air Force Base. If the Shiloh officer, there's a neighboring town of Shiloh just outside Scott Air Force Base, if the Shiloh officer looks up, he might be able to see it.
So what happens next?
Well, what happens next is the Shiloh officer gets on the dispatch radio transmission and states, "I see something, but I don't know what the heck it is."
Oh, I thought he was talking to Barton. He went back to dispatch. He wasn't able to talk to Barton. Okay.
They talked later.
Okay, I got you.
They talked later, but and you have to appreciate the fact that these officers are communicating with each other. But any of the other officers in the surrounding area that are on that channel are listening to this radio.
Everybody's listening to it.
What they're thinking.
Exactly. Now, who took? I want you to continue on with the story, but was it Barton that took the picture, or was it Silo that took the picture?
And that's a perfect segue, Jimmy.
Okay.
That's great. One of the officers, as we were just saying, that was listening to this radio chatter was Officer Craig Stevens of the Millstadt Police Department. Now, Millstadt, for the listeners that aren't familiar with the area, is just to the southwest of Shiloh. And shortly after the Shiloh officer saw this object, it moved off to the southwest. Well, one of the officers that was listening to the radio chatter was Craig Stevens in Millstadt, and he was chuckling to himself, thinking, these guys see some type of military aircraft. So he goes to the east end of town, and he thinks, well, whatever it is, it's going to be heading my direction, and I'll, quickly dismiss this whole thing and put an end to this hysteria. He didn't see anything after a few minutes sitting there, so he decided to move to the north end of town. And on the north end of Millstadt is an open field, a very large open field. In fact, that time of year, way off in the distance, looking to the left, you can see the lights of some of the skyscrapers in downtown St. Louis. That's off in the distance. So we're getting very close to St. Louis proper at this point. As he's sitting there at the north end of town at an area called Liederkranz Park, suddenly this large triangular object moves over his squad car and over him. And he can clearly see this object. He can see a lighting array on the back end of the object. He can see the shape silhouetted against the gray sky. It's blocking out the stars as it's moving overhead. And he had the forethought to pop the trunk of his squad car, grab the Polaroid camera that they used for accident photos and crime scene photos, and snapped a picture of the object in the sky. By his own admission, obviously Polaroid cameras are not designed for nighttime photography. They weren't the best photographers' cameras to begin with, and it was very cold. The squad car trunk was still very cold, and it really wasn't within normal operating temperatures for a Polaroid camera. So the picture came out, rather poor. You can just see a few pinpoints of light. Obviously, no object, no shape is clearly discernible. But then the object continues to move what he thought towards the St. Louis area, which is now moving to the northwest.
Now, what did you think? What did you think of the? I honestly think the picture is great. Considering,
I commend him for his efforts. Unfortunately, I wish we could have discerned a shape. If we could have had a shape, by analyzing that photo, but unfortunately, we just had points of light. But again, I commend him. I think most of us in a situation like that wouldn't even have the forethought to take a picture.
Not at all. And the picture, the reason why I say it's great, it's not Venus, it's not swamp gas,
no,
it's not a conventional aircraft. It you can see that it's in the nighttime sky. You can see that the field in the background. Now the swirl and the way that there's no, you can't. How do I want to say? You don't know what could have affected that film.
Correct.
But it is a crazy picture, and it backs up his story. That's all that I'm saying. I think it's a great picture.
What's interesting about his sighting is not only the photograph, but in the background, and this is played out in a number of documentaries that I've been involved with, the dispatch recordings. And that's what's nice, too, Jimmy, is the fact that we just don't have the eyewitnesses' testimony. We have recordings of communication while this UFO event was taking place.
Absolutely.
And I think that's really important. And it allowed us to essentially establish a flight pattern.
And triangulate everything. Absolutely right.
Exactly.
Yep.
And so, as all this is playing out, you can hear laughter in the background after the initial reports. But then the dispatcher is listening in, obviously. She's receiving all these reports. Officer Stevens radios in and says, "I see that object also." And you hear the dispatcher kind of chuckle and say, "Are you serious?" And the tone of his voice is just like this. He says, "It's huge."
It's huge.
You hear the serious tone of his voice.
It's huge.
Then, shortly after that, it was cited lastly by a Dupo police officer, which, again, is heading in the direction of St. Louis. However, the Dupo officer stated that whatever it was, it appeared to be increasing in altitude and actually doing a U-turn and moving back in the direction from whence it came, namely the northeast. So it never actually moved over the St. Louis area.
It did. It never made it to Scott. Yeah, it never made it to Scott Air Force Base, did it?
No, and that's something that a lot of people said, well, it was sighted near Scott Air Force Base, therefore it must be a military aircraft. We have no reports of this object taking off or landing at Scott Air Force Base. Did
anybody then try to contact Scott during the event?
That's a whole interesting aspect of this case in and of itself. I, of course, filed a Freedom of Information Act request and filed a number of questions directly to the Public Affairs Office. And namely, did you receive reports of this object? Were you operating any military or supporting any military aircraft that would have been flying in the area at the time? Questions of that nature. Obviously people chuckle. It's like, did you really expect them to give you an honest answer? As an investigator, I have to pursue every angle, and I have to at least, make a formal request. The answers came back that the first they heard about the UFO sighting on that morning was when the media contacted them the next day.
Oh, come on.
Now, I take issue with that,
Yeah.
and I can rightly do so because, Jimmy, on the police recordings, Officer Ed Barton of Lebanon states, if you would you please contact Scott Air Force Base and see if they have anything flying in this area, which the dispatcher did.
And that's exactly what they would have done. They almost Scott is right there, and that's the fight.
Exactly.
I mean,
now, so that was roughly at 4:20. Roughly, I may be off slightly on the time, but that was roughly at 4:20 a.m.
So this is 20
right
minutes
in the middle of the sequence of events. The sequence of events happened roughly between 4 and 4:50 a.m. But in the middle of all this, while the events are transpiring, Scott Air Force Base was contacted and told of what was going on. So we have it documented that we know Scott Air Force Base knew about this prior to the next morning.
It's one of the best. Okay, how did it end?
How did it end? As far as the
did
UFO
it just
being sighted?
Yeah. Well, I know that it made a U-turn And then did it fly back over Lebanon and it
No
just head back?
reports of that nature. I was able to identify a couple other witnesses who unfortunately didn't follow through with wanting to be interviewed. They initially contacted me, but then when I tried to pursue the interviews, they decided that they didn't want to talk about it any further. But we had some witnesses north of Lebanon in a couple little municipalities in a rural area that stated they saw the object as it was moving back towards the northeast. We were never able to establish that. But really the last credible report we have was from the Dupo police officer stating that whatever it was, it appeared to be gaining in altitude, and as he stated, seemed to be about the altitude where planes normally are. And it was interesting because the Millstadt officer came back on after he said that. And again, this is all documented in the recordings, and I have the transcript in my book. But it's interesting because the Millstadt officer, the one that said, I see that object also, it's huge, conveyed to the Dupo officer, this object was above me about 500 feet, and it was huge. I mean, like I said, the serious tone of his voice just conveys how serious he was. And
I remember him.
Event.
I remember his description when he said he pulled up in his car and it was up in front of him behind the trees,
yes.
And then he got a clear view of it. And watching this interview with him, I can't remember which documentary it was, but he didn't have a way to describe it except for that it was immense. It was huge.
Yeah, and he was really blown away by this sighting. And the thing is, and you brought this up earlier in reference to one of the earlier cases we were discussing, these officers have patrolled those areas at that time for a number of years. They know what refueling missions look like. They know what cargo planes look like.
Right.
They are familiar with most conventional military aircraft as well as commercial. We have Lambert International Airport not far from there. So this was something highly unusual. Officer Ed Barton himself is a self-described military brat. He said, I grew up on military bases my whole life, and he made the comment in one of the interviews, I'm not familiar with all the R&D aircraft, but all the aircraft I know of make some type of noise. This object was above me, and it made no noise. And that's one of the common characteristics that we see play out time and time again with the historical cases, the fact that these objects are low altitude, large, and silent.
And there's one other thing about Southern Illinois, and you growing up in that area. I was born in Chicago. I lived in Indianapolis. And unless you know that part of the country, basically speaking, you have this across the state, especially Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, that little cluster there is either forest or corn or soybeans, and then you'll have a city in the middle of it, right? But then you drive from 100, just with nothing but cornfields or hills or forest, cornfields, soybeans, and then you come across Lebanon or you come across Springfield, then you cross the state line of Indiana and you run into whatever, Terre Haute, and then you nothing until Indianapolis, nothing but cornfields.
I know it well. I've been in medical sales for years and covered all of those states you just described.
Exactly.
Many hours behind the wheel, and you're absolutely right. It's a very boring drive.
There's nothing out there. So if this craft took off and avoided Lebanon, well, then it's flying over basically nothing.
Yes.
And there wouldn't be anybody in its flight path to look up and see it, or not any dense population. That's for sure. It's farmland. It's the heartland of America. That's what's out there. And
now, there's another interesting aspect to this case, and you have to appreciate this was in January of 2000. For those that may remember Walt Andrus when he was the international director for MUFON.
Absolutely.
Walt contacted me right after this, and I think his words were, "Are you on top of this, or are you aware of this sighting?" And I'm like, "Yes, I am. It's being covered by the media." So Walt asked me, when you get your preliminary investigation wrapped up, would you mind writing an article for the MUFON Journal, which I did in 2000. And shortly thereafter, I was requested to speak at the Ozark UFO conference that was hosted by my late friend Lou Farish. And Lou asked me to present this case because obviously it was generating a lot of interest. And it was really the first public lecture on the case. And I remember discussing it, and as I concluded my lecture, I stepped off the podium, and had a hand placed on my shoulder. And there was this middle-aged gentleman standing there, and he was brandishing a business card, which he pushed in my face. And he said, if you need to know anything about radar or you need any assistance regarding radar with this case, I work for the FAA.
No
and
kidding.
I've come to know this man and have worked with him in the years subsequent to that. But he's now a good friend. His name's Richard Taylor, and he's retired from the FAA. And Richard actually oversaw, I believe it was Westinghouse, who installed the latest radar system at Lambert International Airport. And he's a 35-year veteran of the FAA, and he's very familiar with radar arrays, radar systems, not only at Lambert, but he's familiar with the systems that are stationed at Scott Air Force Base.
Mm-hmm.
And what caught his attention was when I gave this lecture, I stated that according to Scott Air Force Base, their radar was down during the time of this sighting, which I thought was ludicrous. I just thought, that, here's a cover-up, here's more lies.
Right, of course.
But he stated, to my surprise, that they do weekly and monthly maintenance on the radar array. And surprise, typically they do their maintenance between the hours of midnight and 6 a.m. because they usually don't have flights scheduled at that time. So he said, I know that sounds suspicious from a layman's standpoint, but I'm here to tell you they do weekly and monthly maintenance, and it's usually between midnight and 6 a.m. But regardless of who or what was flying this object, isn't it interesting that they took that window of opportunity to do a flyby of the base?
Bingo. Took the words right out of my mouth. Now, but let's go back to Lambert. And was he able to get any radar information out of Lambert?
Well, an interesting story with that as well. I mean, there's so many layers to the story. It's like a great detective story.
Well, if I remember right, the reason why I'm asking, I'm sorry to cut you off. I apologize. No. I do that sometimes. I talked to Leslie Kane about this case.
Yeah.
And I think, wasn't it she in one of the documentaries about this too as well? I can't remember.
I have a hard time keeping up with all of them, to be honest with you.
Well, it seems like I have seen radar with this case. Maybe not. Maybe it was just a graphic.
Probably a graphic, because I do have a story related to the radar.
Okay, let's.
Richard, just to pick up where I left off with Richard at this conference, obviously I wanted to take him up on his offer because he had stated, if you want to go to the radar facility at Lambert, I can introduce you to some of the air traffic controllers and we can talk about radar and I can explain kind of how the systems work. Well, of course, I'm going to take someone up on that offer,
right?
Especially related to in the wake of this wave of sightings. So, and again, I mentioned in my book, it's hard to fathom that this actually took place. But again, remember, this is pre-9/11, before security really got tight. I met Richard at Lambert International Airport about a month or so later, and we went to the radar control building where the radar control tower is, walked right in. He had his badge on, and everyone knew Richard there. Walked in, looked at everybody, and said, "This is Dave, he's with me." So, I mean, with security now in a post-9/11 environment,
it never
it's hard
happened.
to imagine that.
Yeah.
But I walked in, and he introduced me to the air traffic controllers that were downstairs, and then we went up into the control tower. Actually, I was watching all the commercial airliners coming in, and I talked to some of the radar controllers there. And what was interesting is over the years, Jimmy, I know when people are humoring me or where they've kind of got a little tongue-in-cheek kind of attitude when I start talking about UFOs. Every one of these air traffic controllers was dead serious when they were talking to me. When Richard introduced me and said, "Dave's here," and I'm talking about radar relevant to that January 5th, 2000 sighting that we just had, all of them, and I think part of this was due to the serious nature of the local media reports that were covering the case, all of them expressed interest. They said, "Well, what are you finding out? What have you been able to find out regarding this report?"
Really? Well, plus you don't look like a crackpot either.
I'd like to think that I bring a serious tone to the subject.
Yeah, exactly. So,
but they were all very interested. I mean, you could tell that there was an interest level there. And so after I'd met with them and discussed the case and so forth, we went downstairs and we met just as we were leaving. We passed their break room downstairs. And I'll remember this because I'm kind of a history buff, not just with UFOs, but as we passed the break room, there was a gentleman sitting there and he was watching the History Channel on TV. And we walked by, and he goes, let me introduce you to one more guy. So he introduced me to this friend of his, and he goes, I was, bringing Dave up here just talking about radar. And, of course, for many of the UFO researchers that are out there or UFO enthusiasts that are listening, there's a 14-day window where if we want to obtain radar data, we have to file our report to the Air Traffic Control Center in a very timely fashion, usually right after a UFO event takes place because of processing time and mail and so forth.
Right.
And after 14 days, they recycle the radar tapes. So we have a very narrow window when it comes to trying to obtain radar information. If we don't get our request in soon enough, it's erased or written over. And of course, this was now, I believe it was March, if I'm not mistaken. Or actually, I take it back. I think this would have been June. And so he was telling this gentleman, well, I was telling Dave that, of course, the radar data isn't available anymore because we've, far exceeded that 14-day window. And just by happenstance, we happened to catch this man in the break room. You know how he responded to that statement, Jimmy?
Talk to me.
He said, no. He goes, we have that radar data. He goes, this is his words, we were told to pull the data from an outside agency. We received a request from a, quote, outside agency, unquote.
What?
Well, that was Richard's response. As far as he knew, the radar data was erased or written over. And you could have seen my friend Richard's jaw drop when he said that. He goes, what are you talking about? And he referenced another coworker of his. He said, so-and-so received a phone call from an outside agency. He didn't know which agency, and he was told to pull the data to save it. So Richard, through his contacts, knew this gentleman, was able to get a copy of that, which he then provided for me, and provided the software by which I could run this on my home computer. And Richard and I sat there, and we sifted through the radar data for that morning.
Wait. Okay. Stop right there. And I apologize for interrupting.
No.
You are telling me that you were able to get the tape, decode the tape, so it could be translated back into visual information because it's a tape full of data that is meaningless to anybody unless you can encode, decode. Am I correct?
Luckily, I had Richard there to help me decipher it.
Okay. And you were able to... Okay, but this is my question because I know you're going to tell me what you saw. Who else has seen this tape?
Well, Richard, myself, and a few other of my colleagues in the UFO field have seen it. I still have the radar data. I mean, it's still in the file, filed away. But we sifted through the data, and as I stated in my book, UFO investigations don't get any better than this. We had the radar data. We had the latitude, longitude coordinates of where the witnesses were. We had the times of the sightings as documented on the timestamps from the St. Clair County dispatch tapes. So we had location, time, and radar data. And we were able to correlate that. Unfortunately, in looking at the witness locations, the times, and the radar data, we weren't able to find any target that correlated with the path of this UFO. Now, that being said, Richard, as well as a few of his colleagues that I consulted with after that, stated that if the object was 500 to 1,000 feet altitude, based on the location of the radar array at Lambert, it may not have been picked up on radar. It may have essentially, quite literally flown under the radar because of the topography there as well. But they said if Scott Air Force Base's radar was functioning, we guarantee something would have been picked up on radar. But unfortunately, as we were told, Scott Air Force Base's radar was not functioning at the time.
Okay, I've got one of our guys that participates in the show often, E.M. Rosa. He's listening to me right now. He just tweeted. So let's clarify this because I know the answer, I'm pretty sure. But maybe you can also address this. He says, you're telling me that the NSA records all phone, text, emails, but radar data gets recycled after 14 days. What he doesn't understand, Eugene, what you have to understand is we're talking about tape. And tape back in the way that the radar data was recorded back then. It wasn't done to hard drives.
Right.
It wasn't. Today, yes, it's very cheap to record everything on the hard drives. It's inexpensive. But back then, a reel of tape was expensive, and it was a few $100s. And so it would be, and it took up a ton of space. And you could only record like 15, depends on the speed of the machine, 15 or 30 minutes at a time on a full reel of tape. So, Eugene, you have to understand, if you did 24 hours of recording, you would have to change the reels every 30 minutes, put on a fresh reel, and put that in a box. Not only that, they weighed about 10 pounds each.
Well, and in the last several years, I don't know if that policy has changed. I haven't had to request any radar data in the last several years.
Yeah.
So
Now I'm sure it's to hard drives, sure. But back then, so Eugene, you have to understand, it was expensive and bulky and time consuming. And so in a lot of cases, that's what they would do. They would take those reels, they'd flip them over and just record over them and backwards.
Well, and 99.9% of that radar data is never ever really looked at unless there's some type of mid-air collision or a near miss associated with aircraft. So 99.9% of that is really just wasted, useless data.
Right. Oh, he just responded back. My bad. I thought you meant currently. It's okay, Eugene.
Oh, no. Sorry.
No. So yeah, and again, that's why the NSA can record everything that they do today in bulk, because it's ones and zeros and digital and hard drives.
With digital capabilities now, absolutely.
Yeah, it's two totally different things. Okay, so back to so now, were your hands just shaking, and were you able to digest what you were looking at on the screen? I mean, could you see all the cities? You could see St. Louis, you could see Lebanon.
Can't see the cities. You have to have the latitude longitude coordinates, and when you move your cursor over any point of the map, it'll actually show you the latitude longitude coordinates.
Yeah, of course. That's not what I meant. My bad question. What I mean is you could see the flight path where it would could the radar, let me back up, could the radar see out over Lebanon so you could see the flight path and how it went over all of southern Illinois? I mean, how far did the radar go? That's the question.
Oh, you're testing my long-term memory.
Okay, well, that's okay. I'm trying to visualize what you had seen.
And long-range radar, and I used to know this, Jimmy. I want to say, oh my goodness, you're testing my long-term memory here. I want to say it was 75 miles or 100 miles, if I'm not mistaken.
So then it would have gotten to Lebanon from St. Louis.
Easily.
Okay, gotcha.
Absolutely.
Okay, so what did you see? Tell us.
Well,
I'm freaking out.
I mean, we could see all the commercial airliners that were in and around the area that were coming in. Not a lot of traffic at that time of night, as you can appreciate, as opposed to daytime. But we could see the correlated targets. And unfortunately, with the Malaysia Air incident just recently, a lot of us are familiar now with transponders and things of that nature that's been in the news a lot lately. But we can actually see the flight number. You could see the altitude of the correlated targets where transponders were active with these aircraft.
Right.
And then you could see a lot of uncorrelated targets, which some of that may have been noise that hasn't been filtered out. But again, it's been years since I've reviewed that. But luckily, I had Richard there. Otherwise, I would have been completely inept. I'll be honest with you, as far as trying to interpret what I was looking at.
How did he react?
Well, I mean, he was. I think we were both disappointed. I mean, we really thought we might be able to actually have radar confirmation of what these police officers had seen, but unfortunately, we just didn't have that. But again, from a UFO investigation standpoint, it's not very often that we have eyewitness testimony, the St. Clair County dispatch tapes with time indexes noting the not just an approximate time, but the actual time when these officers are reporting in,
that's right,
stating that they're seeing the object, and then to have the radar data correlated with that. I mean, even though nothing came out of that, it's a rare instance where we have those variables that we can put together.
Well, and once again, I mean, it would have to be an aircraft that wanted to be seen as well.
Exactly.
Now, I want to, because, I knew this was going to happen with you, David. We got 80,000 things we got to talk about tonight. and the time is blazing by. So, and before I let this thought escape me, I want to go back because I want to stay on the St. Louis sighting. Well, sort of. With these two other drawings that are here in the gallery, the first one, and apologize if I'm saying this wrong, but is it Patapsco State
I believe
Park?
it's Patapsco State Park.
Okay, so with that, I mean, obviously that is the same aircraft. That is the same sighting.
It looks like it, doesn't it, Jimmy?
Well, there's no question about it. There's just no way that those two knew each other. And what's the date on the Patapsco?
Let me click on that one. I'm off the top of my head.
I don't have a date
trying to
here.
remember now.
Okay, we can come back to that. And then the other drawing that's in the middle of the top row, 1967. What does that say? I'm confused.
Thank you. I want to talk about that one.
Does that say
specifically.
Scott Air Force Base?
It does.
And
that's the one I actually wanted to go to.
Okay.
because it's a nice segue into that case.
I can't believe it. I mean, seriously, and for somebody to sit here, any debunker, any skeptic, I mean, come on, bring it right now and explain this away.
Thank you. This is a very interesting story. Let me just back up for a moment and just state that where I got a lot of this information was through newspaper archives, but where I also gathered a lot of this information was the fact that over the years I've inherited large collections of UFO literature, newspaper articles, scrapbooks of various newspaper articles, and so forth. And I have a fairly extensive private library, about 16 four-drawer file cabinets full of scrapbooks, newspaper articles, etc., as well as numerous books and journals. So, a fairly extensive library.
And this drawing that we're looking at, and just because I'm wondering right now, was this physically drawn in 1967?
It was actually drawn in 1968.
That's okay. Close enough, man.
Yes. It was drawn about a month later.
Wow.
But one of the collections I obtained was the St. Louis Study Group of Greater St. Louis, which was actually a precursor to MUFON. Walt Andrus, John Schuessler, names that we know in the field now,
absolutely,
were early members of the St. Louis Study Group of Greater St. Louis before MUFON formed. And they used to attend the meetings. The organization in 2005 came to the realization that the board members, the original founding members, were getting up there in age. Some of them were dying off due to old age and medical issues. And they basically had a meeting to decide, what are we going to do with all this material we've gathered over the last 20, 30, 40 years. And so they decided, because I was doing historical research and I was trying to preserve UFO history, that they would allocate all of their material and incorporate it into my library. One of the report forms that I stumbled across going through their material was a report from 1968 of a sighting in December 1967, and the sketch that you're seeing there is from the front page of the report form, and it is, as you see, a triangular UFO with windows on the side, and it was sighted just outside Scott Air Force Base, almost exactly in the location where the Shiloh police officer saw his triangular UFO on January 5th, 2000. What are the odds of that?
And they're too extreme. Go play the lottery. You'd be better off. And
Jimmy, I'm not embarrassed to tell you and the audience that when I was sifting through all these papers, and mind you, I had 4 SUVs full of boxes of papers, journals, newspaper articles, etc. When I pulled this paper out, and what caught my attention was obviously the sketch. But then when I flipped to the second page and I saw a map of where this was sighted, I'm not embarrassed to tell you I had goosebumps.
It's right there. And okay, well, you haven't told us. Obviously, Scott Air Force Base, but go ahead, tell us, what was the path?
Well, the object was sighted just over the town of Belleville, Illinois, which is situated just to the west of Scott Air Force Base. And a gentleman and his girlfriend were driving when they saw this object in the night sky. And they basically tried to keep up with the object. It was moving very slowly, but in order to keep up, they had to go through all these various side roads. And were able to keep it in view for the most part the entire time. And then the object disappeared to the southeast. They actually went to Scott Air Force Base after it disappeared and asked if they had reported anything or if they knew of anything that was tracked on radar, and they said no. We haven't had any reports and nothing's been tracked on radar. What is interesting about this? There's a couple interesting key aspects to this. One, it was documented in 1968 and quite literally filed away. No one knew about this report. It's very easy for people to see the documentaries regarding the January 5th, 2000 incident.
Exactly.
As you mentioned, Jimmy, it's a very popular case.
Yep.
And it's very easy for people today to say, oh, yeah, I saw that back in 1965.
Right.
This was documented in 68.
That's why I wanted to know. I wanted to know when it was drawn.
Absolutely. What's more interesting, after I saw this and after I kind of digested what I was looking at, I decided, you know what? I'm going to try to track this witness down. I found out he was still alive, still lived in southern Illinois, where I was still living at the time. I tracked him down, contacted him first by email, then by phone, arranged a time to meet with him, and went to his home with fellow researcher Daryl Barker, who investigated the January 5th, 2000 case, interviewed him, asked if he would mind to be recorded audio just for my records, and then Daryl brought his video equipment. And he didn't balk at being audio recorded. He said, no. He goes, I'm retired. What's anybody going to do to me? I don't care. And then we asked, well, would you mind if we videotaped you? And he looked at his wife and he said, no, I don't care. He goes, I don't care what people think. And so we were able to get him on videotape. And when I give local lectures, I actually play segments of this. But what's interesting is this. When I first contacted him, the first words out of his mouth, Jimmy, was, how in the hell did you find out about this UFO sighting after all these years?
And you said?
I said, I'm looking at your report form that you filed. He responded with, I didn't file a report. I said, yes, you did. And he said, no, you didn't. And we played this game of going back and forth for what seemed like an entire minute. No, yes, you did. No, I didn't. And I said, okay. I said, well, can we meet? Would you mind if we met? And so we did the interview in his dining room. And keep in mind, as an investigator, this was back in 67, and here I'm interviewing him, I believe it was 2012. I'm sitting there, and I'm holding his report form. I will not let him look at it. And I went down and I asked him all of the relevant questions that we do during a normal UFO investigation, and I'm looking at his answers from 1968. Point for point, he was on the mark. I even tried misleading him, seeing if he could be led by suggesting false information, and he quickly corrected me. He goes, no, there were no lights other than the windows that I saw, or no, it didn't do that, it did this.
And this is approximately 32 years later?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And there was not one detail that he deviated from his report from 1968. And then, at the end of the interview, he goes, again, I don't know how in the heck you found out about this sighting. And I said, I've got your report form right here. He goes, I'm telling you, I didn't fill out a report form. I slid it across his dining room table. I flipped the first page over to the second page, pointed to his signature on the bottom. I looked at him and I looked at his wife and I said, is that your signature? And the look on his face, Jimmy, he looked at the report form, he looked at me, he looked at his wife, he looked back down at the report form, and he shrugged his shoulders and said, you know what? That's my signature. He goes, but I'll be damned if I remember filing a report back then.
What do you deduce from that? And what did he suggest? I mean, of not remembering? Was his signature?
What was funny is he reported this object, but he told me during the course of the interview, I don't believe in UFOs.
Wow.
So it was rather funny. He doesn't believe in UFOs, but he saw this unconventional aerial object that he couldn't explain.
Yeah, and this is the thing. It just doesn't make sense. And it wasn't making sense to him at that time. It's not making sense to me now.
Absolutely.
Was his signature forged? Did somebody else fill out the form for him and he just signed?
Well,
that's what I mean.
My signature. He goes, I just don't remember. It's just with the passage of years. He goes, I just don't remember doing that.
Wow. You know, and also remember what I said to you earlier. And my producers, by the way, have just texted me again, told me to stop talking. That I'm doing all the talking here to let you talk. But remember what I said to you earlier. I took those pictures down up in Monterey.
Yes.
I forgot about them for 6 months.
Absolutely.
And not only that, after I developed the pictures and looked at them, I didn't tell anybody. I might have told 2 people
Yes.
over the next 15 years. That stuff got put in a drawer, and I wasn't going to, it was the last thing I was going to do was parade that in front of everybody
Right.
going, look, 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 look. I didn't need that.
Well, one of the questions I asked this gentleman, I said, we talked previously because I explained the fact that I investigated the January 5th, 2000 incident, and he commented, he goes, I remember seeing something on the Discovery Channel or something, and he goes, you kind of look familiar now, and he goes, I probably saw you on one of those shows. And I said, well, knowing what you saw then, watching what these officers reported from January 5th, 2000, what were you thinking, or what was your reaction? I felt like that was a fairly logical question, right, Jimmy? And his response was, and it was just this matter-of-fact look on his face. He goes, well, I saw what was on TV, and I just looked at my wife, and I said, those boys, meaning the police officers, those boys basically saw what I saw back in 67. And he just kind of left it at that.
Wait,
It's a very kind of practical, pragmatic way of, saying, it's like, well, yeah, they saw what I saw.
And when you, as the lead investigator for MUFON at that time, dealing with the St. Louis sighting, or Lebanon sighting, whatever it's called, and then you go and you dig this up from 68, I'm sorry, I know that the descriptions from the sighting in 2000 in Illinois, you knew that's fresh on the brain. And
Absolutely.
then you turn around and you see this drawing, because I just freaked. Okay, I open it up. It says Scott Air Force Base. It's right there, and it's the same craft.
Absolutely.
But it's a picture drawn 32 years before that Barton or the Dispatch or anybody else up in Lebanon, nobody knew about this case.
And let's be honest, at that time, unless you were really digging into the material like I was later in preparation for this book, most people then didn't even know UFOs were triangular. At that time, you still had the ubiquitous flying saucer being reported.
Right. And I look at this picture and I see those windows, and I almost start to hyperventilate a little bit. I mean, that's a crazy coincidence.
I'm not going to lie. I had goosebumps when I first going through the papers and I pulled that out. And when I saw the sketch, I thought, well, that's intriguing. When I saw where it was cited, I was just amazed. I'm still amazed.
That's good stuff.
This was one of the reasons for writing the book, because there are consistencies in these reports, and there are patterns that appear to emerge.
Well, okay, talk about consistencies. I got to hear this story. This is the third time I've tried to get you to talk about it. Now we're going to go to this Patapsco.
Oh, okay.
Patapsco. I hope I'm saying that right. Patapsco,
I believe, is the...
Patapsco.
I think someone corrected me once. I think they said it's Patapsco.
Okay, Patapsco State Park. This is an APRO investigation. That's interesting, which means this is aged. So it's obviously old. Where is Patapsco? Let's start there. Don't tell me it's outside of Scott Air Force Base, or I'm going to lose my mind.
I believe, and I'm actually trying to find that case, because it's been a while since I've really talked about that particular case, but I believe it's in New York, if I'm not mistaken. And this was investigated. What's interesting is you can see there, this was an APRO investigation, Aerial Phenomenon Research Organization case. And they investigated this rather thoroughly. And this was over a state park. And there were numerous witnesses to this event. What was interesting is, and this is something that bears out time and time again in these reports, Jimmy, they saw not one but two of these objects.
Is there something... I'm looking at the picture, and for everybody out there that is wondering what we're looking at, let me close this and scroll back down. We're looking at the second picture from the left in the bottom row. Okay, yeah. Second picture from the left in the bottom row. Now, as I look at this, is that something in the back window?
Yes.
Okay, what is that?
Seeing something, some being inside one of the windows.
Okay, so that's what that is. Okay,
all absolutely. Right. And like I said, they reported not just one, but two of these objects. One disappeared and then was replaced by a second object that matched the description.
There are no coincidences. And to see, okay, but we don't know the exact date on this. When did APRO fold?
APRO, actually, that was in the mid-'80s.
Right.
After Jim Lorenzen passed away, and then his wife, Coral, passed away shortly thereafter, unfortunately. And at that point, the group disbanded. But
right.
they
I
did
was thinking
phenomenal
82, but no matter what, it's way before 2000. And
Absolutely.
This was done before 82, 83, 82, but we don't know exactly when. Okay, but nonetheless, it wasn't done anywhere near the 2000 sighting in Illinois.
No.
And I only bring that up because this needs to be driven home. This is not it's too crazy. This would stand up in the court of law, okay? To have these three drawings 20 years apart. I don't know when this one was. I don't. But
I would completely agree with you on that point.
I mean, we're talking about eyewitness testimony, a police sketch artist, 20 years apart that are drawn the identical. I mean, there isn't anything. Wow. That is just fascinating.
And the details, as you pointed out, with the windows as well. I mean, that just really stands out.
Yep.
And again, the APRO organization just did some phenomenal research with regard to their investigations, and this is just one of the cases that they had. There were some other triangular reports as well, and actually, this was in the April 1978 issue of the APRO Bulletin, and the sighting occurred on March 22nd, 1978, at approximately 11 p.m.
This one in Patapsco State Park,
Yes.
1978.
And I'm sorry, it was actually in the state of Maryland.
Okay, so even better. That's even better. It's so, again, 68, 78, and 2000. Perfect. And there's no way that's in Maryland. I'm just, if I'm a private investigator, if I'm from the outside looking in, nobody knew each other. There's no way they could have heard of this case.
And again, to add to the uncanny resemblance to other reports, they described that this object was 150 to 200 feet on each side.
No kidding.
And that it moved approximately 200 to 250 feet above the ground.
And there's one other fascinating thing about this is it's the line that goes down the windows,
yes,
indicating maybe 2 stories or a double row of windows, which I don't think we discussed, but my memory says that was brought up in the Lebanon sighting.
I was just going to, you took the words out of my mouth, Jimmy. I was just going to suggest that, if you recall, Melvern Knoll described windows in the back of the object with vertical bars, and we do see those vertical bars demonstrated in this case from Maryland.
Exactly. And, that whole image of the Illinois sighting has been burned in my mind for years. I've never heard of this Patapsco sighting. I haven't, or the previous one in 1968.
Well, Richard Dolan, at one point, as we were reviewing the manuscript in preparation for publication, almost in a state of disbelief, he's like, "Where are you finding these cases?
Yeah,
I've never
man.
heard of some of these."
I'm with Richard. I'm fully with Richard on this one. Amazing research, man. I'm very impressed. Very impressed.
Well, yeah. Do we have time to talk about the Danish wave I was describing earlier?
You know what? If we have to, I'll ask the network. Keith is listening to us right now. Man, if we run up against it, he'll extend us a few minutes. So don't worry about it. And I'm looking at the audience numbers right now. We're looking pretty good. So yeah, he'll let us keep going. Please,
right.
Keith.
I just want to mention that of course, most of us are familiar with the Belgian wave of sightings regarding these large triangles. And, we think of the Belgian military investigating those sightings. What I found particularly interesting, and this is something that I had not heard before, was that there was a wave of sightings from November of 1957 into 1958 over the country of Denmark. And I found a quote from the Danish newspaper BT that stated, quote, "Triangular spaceships have also now appeared in the southern part of Jutland. From every part come reports of mysterious phenomena in the sky towards the late evening. All witnesses state with certainty that conventional aircraft are not involved." And it goes on to state, "So many reports of a similar nature have been sent to the Air Force station of Skridstrup that they have been unable to cope with them all, and more are expected in the near future. And then, as if to bolster that report, I was trying to find some corroboration in other news sources, and I found a Reuters news article of all things from April 19th, 1958, and the title of that article was "Spaceship over Denmark." And this was an extremely detailed sighting. And again, this is Reuters. We're talking mainstream news.
Yeah, and the curious thing there, as the curious thing, when you're talking about Reuters or UPI, they didn't sling the word spaceship around freely. There's editors. No.
And that's one of the things that shocked me. I mean, the headlines on some of these articles were amazing. But it stated that a woman on April 15th, 1958, near the town of Brohyr in South Jutland, described a low-flying triangular object she witnessed as big and black. And certainly we know that description matches modern-day reports. But further, she noted as it flew over Brohyr, a number of horseshoe-shaped objects emitting a strong light emerged from the large craft. And then it goes on to state, as if that sounds crazy, the woman's account was corroborated by approximately 20 other witnesses in the village who reported seeing a, quote, triangular spaceship, unquote, in the same area at the same time.
Horseshoe-shaped, like scout craft, possibly?
I don't know. But again, this is one of the characteristics that seems to bear out. Objects seem to fly out of these triangular UFOs. In the Belgian wave, red lights were seen to detach or come out of the triangular UFO and fly around independently.
Right. And that's some of the best video that I've seen is a couple of those Belgian craft with a little red little scout craft scurrying around outside. Now, but this is, well, I'm sure that you've already thought of this, but when I hear horseshoe, I'm also thinking that's the way that they described it, but it could have been V-shaped.
It could have been.
But anything but a triangle or a ball or anything like that. But they're describing horseshoe. That's an interesting. I wonder what they actually saw.
And the Danish Defense Intelligence Service was investigating these triangular UFO reports at the time. So by no means was Belgium without precedence as far as having the military of a major country investigating triangular UFOs. But a little side note to that, as if that isn't strange enough, at the same time, we're talking November 1957 when this wave of sightings started in Denmark, two, not just one, but two Project Blue Book cases here in the United States were occurring the same month. Both sightings in this case occurred November 5th, 1957. One reported a large triangular red object with a green light in front, yellow or gray in the rear, with a low droning sound traveling west to east and vice versa along the Illinois-Wisconsin border. And then another report the same evening in the Air Force Project Blue Book files described an amber or orange triangular-shaped object, and get a load of this, 200 feet in size. And the object was seen with red light and was sighted for 5 minutes.
I just got a post. I just got
time.
Yeah,
as the Danish wave.
I just got a post here, and it says the only logical comparison I can make, although I don't buy, is that these are early F-117 prototypes. And this is the thing. Fine, yes, but an F-117's wingspan is about 50 feet. It's not 200 feet. And,
well,
and these are moving very, very slowly, and there's windows.
Very slowly, and again, when we're talking 1957, I can't accept that.
Right, 57, 67. Let's stop for a second. I was telling you about this for a while now, so let's just jump out of that gallery while we're thinking about it before I let this slip out of, we run out of time completely. Scroll down past your gallery and see where it says Texas Chili. See that gallery? Texas Chili. Everybody, just go to Texas Chili. All the way down at the bottom of the page. Texas Chili Church Rant. Are you there, David?
I'm scrolling as we speak.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I don't move as fast as some of these triangular UFOs can.
Okay, so when you get down to Texas Chile, it's the second gallery from the bottom. There's only 3 pictures in the gallery.
Okay, there we go.
Okay, click on the black and white picture in the middle.
All righty.
It says Texas Triangle.
Now that's interesting.
That's interesting. Now that was taken last week here I was going to say here in Texas. That was taken last week in Texas. And now there's a couple of things that I want everybody to note about this picture. Obviously terrestrial.
Yes.
Okay, but and I've had a bunch of people speculate on what they're looking at here. I've heard everything from B2s to Aurora and advance this and that. But it's a kick-ass picture. I have no idea what it is. Now, when I look at this curiously, and I had mentioned this to you earlier, forget about it being a terrestrial craft. If you looked up into the sky and you weren't looking at the exhaust, depending on what altitude it was, right, there would be no exhaust at all. And if you saw that in the sky without exhaust, you wouldn't know what you were looking at.
Absolutely, and I would add, Jimmy, if it's at a high altitude, you wouldn't necessarily hear anything.
You wouldn't hear anything. And at that altitude, what we're looking at here looks like it's pretty substantial in size.
Yeah.
And a 117, if you look at this picture, a 117 doesn't fly at that speed, or it looks like it's hauling, here. I don't know how fast it's going, but it's indicating to me that this thing is ripping. But it doesn't. It kind of has that 117 shape to it, but it looks too big.
It looks more like the plan form of an F-117 as opposed to a B-2, where the B-2 is more of a
wing,
more of an isosceles triangle.
Yep. But it's a great picture. Now, click on the color picture right next to it. I'm sorry you have to close it and scroll down again. We haven't been able to fix that yet, but we'll get to it. But if you click on the color picture next to it, it's obviously trailing a couple of other craft. Okay, there's a couple of other planes, right? Now look at that. Now that's obviously taken 1-to-1, so you're looking up at the sky, right? And you see something like this tearing across the sky. The reason why I'm not thinking stealth, and I could be wrong, but I think the exhaust on the 117, the plane flies too slow. First off, it doesn't fly fast, but it doesn't. It never emits contrails. Otherwise, you're giving away its location.
Correct.
So I don't know what that is, but again, if you look at something like this without the contrails, and you look up at the sky, you don't know what you're looking at. And
you're absolutely right, and it's great that you bring this up, because quite often what I'm doing when I'm doing the historical research and in the book, I'm looking for the common things that are reported. But I think what's also important are the things that are absent. And to your point, the reports that I documented in the book have a complete absence of contrail.
Right.
And compared to the sighting that we're looking at here, the sighting of this object, which, like as you mentioned, is clearly terrestrial in nature. It looks like other than the object itself, it looks like a conventional, contrail.
Yes, it does.
What's interesting is the fact that these objects that are reported are quite often, as was referred to earlier in some of the reports we discussed, often 100 to 200 feet in altitude and a very large size.
Yes, exactly. And what's really cool about this picture is somebody took a picture of something he wasn't supposed to take a picture of. You know what I mean? This was not supposed to have been photographed, and I commend this guy for being there at the right place at the right time. And it's obviously some type of a prototype or research aircraft or something, Black Ops. It just doesn't fit any description of anything that we have in the air right now. I'm just judging from the distance here. It's pretty big. I don't know if you've ever stood next to a 117, but I have. I've photographed it and walked up and touched it and underneath it and all around it. And the only way that I could describe it to everybody, unless you've done that yourself, you have no idea on how small that thing is.
Absolutely.
It's a tiny little cruiser. It's a it's a itty bitty little
thing. I had the B-2 stealth bomber fly overhead as well. So when people talk about the B-2, I can have an appreciation for what that looks like, and more importantly, what it sounds like. It certainly sounds like a conventional jet aircraft as it flies directly overhead. We were having an all-star game a few years back in St. Louis, and I saw the B-2 flying around and circling, and I knew it was going to be doing a flyover of Busch Stadium in St. Louis for the all-star game. And so I kind of positioned myself where I thought it might be making an approach run towards downtown St. Louis, and I stopped at the exact right spot on the shoulder of the road and stood outside my vehicle, and the B-2 made a direct buzz over my head heading towards downtown St. Louis, and it was just incredible. But
it makes sound.
It makes sound.
Yeah, it does. It does. I've been around the B-2 a few times, more than once, different air shows and flybys and stuff, and a couple strange encounters with them. But the one thing I can say, although you can't hear it coming, you can hear it going. And
Absolutely.
You can hear the wind. You can hear it cutting through the atmosphere. It's a pretty trippy sound, but it's definite sound. It's mechanical, and you can hear it. Freaky coming at you because you almost can't see it because it's so friggin' flat.
It just looks like a dark line when
it's
making
it
that approach
really
towards
does.
you.
Yep. It really does. But there's no question that it's just a really cool plane.
Yeah, it sounds like conventional. If you close your eyes and it flew overhead, you would say conventional jet aircraft.
Yep. No question about it. And you're not going to mistake that. Now, if it's if it's at a distance and it's up in the, it has some altitude and it's dead on front of you and you happen to be able to see it and take a picture, well, yeah, it could look a little strange and a little foreign. But once you really, get a good look at it, it's just a really cool plane. You're not going to mistake that for any type of ET craft. 117, that's another story. I could see that, especially back in the mid 80s. Flying around, Area 51 at a weird time of night at the right angle, dude, it's an alien invasion.
And it's interesting too because I in the book I talk about the fact that in the mid 80s there were reports in the newspapers of the time of dark triangular / boomerang shaped UFO flying over the Antelope Valley area in California. And people stated that it looked unusual, however, it had a conventional jet aircraft sound. And about 2 or 3 years later, it was released that was in fact the B-2 stealth bomber.
Okay, let's see. I got a couple of, it's about what we're talking about. Black Triangle is an email from Brad. It says, the second picture on the bottom row and last picture looked like what I saw in 1985 at Fort Hood. I wrote you about that a few weeks ago. Oh, yes, you did, Brad. That's right. It had an Apache helicopter escort. It was silent. Many stopped and watched it. It was huge. So there you go. And let's see. Let me go back and really quick before we move on. Emails just coming in. Does the guest have any information on military lighter than aircraft named Big Black Deltas?
I've heard of that, and yes, I have had some information that I've come across. Unfortunately, I don't have that in front of me right now, but I have heard of that. And certainly some of these could be lighter-than-air vehicles. There's been references to a stealth blimp that's purported to exist. Unfortunately, we don't have any conclusive information as far as its existence. And again, I think with the modern reports, and I believe was that Brad that had commented on his sighting a minute ago?
Yes.
I think we have to be very cautious about the modern-day reports, especially if there's Apache helicopters that are escorting an object like that. That seems to be highly suggestive that some of the, and I want to emphasize this, modern reports might in fact be military aircraft.
This just came in from Ben. He says, Jimmy, maybe the UFO shapes are changing because the aliens are getting better deals on the newer models. Well done, Ben. Well done. Art, if you remember Art's famous sighting that he had out
yes.
Yeah, which was Again, black. I think he described it as 200, 250 feet across, silent and slow.
Yes.
But that was right next to Area 51. So again, what if, and what I don't buy, the one thing that I have a hard time, and you just brought it up, the one thing I can't quite get there, and watch, I'll be totally wrong, is lighter than air. I'm not going there. I feel much more comfortable if it was terrestrial and anti-gravity. Okay,
Right.
I get that. ET visiting, I get that. I'm comfortable with that. But if our defense forces, if DARPA is building blimps, and we think that that's the way to go, triangle-shaped blimps, I don't know. I'm not comfortable with that, and I just don't think that's what it is. I don't think they're that dumb, unless
I've
isn't
talked
that?
to some aviation experts, and they've stated that based on the acceleration rates that these triangular UFOs have been seen to demonstrate, that there's simply not a structure solid enough for a lighter-than-air vehicle to sustain the G-force that these objects would sustain as a result of rapid acceleration and deceleration.
Right. Hey, really quick, I've just got to say this over the air really quick. David, I got your tweet. Everything is over at jimmychurchradio.com on the homepage, jimmychurchradio.com. Just scroll down. All the galleries are there, and you can check it out from there. Okay? Tweet again if you can't get it, but I think you'll figure it out. Okay, now, really quick, and I'm going to ask Keith. Keith, I don't know if we're going to need some extra time, but it's Michio Kaku after us, so we can cut out 15 minutes of Michio. He won't mind. I want to talk about Phoenix Lights, and I don't know if you have posted anything here, or is this last one? No, that's Long Eaton Trader. Okay, so you don't have anything here on the Phoenix Lights.
No, I really didn't touch on the Phoenix Lights in the book, and there were a couple other instances I didn't touch on too much, simply because, and I'm sure you can appreciate this, Jimmy, a lot of UFO books rehash information that's already been put out in multiple other books. And I really wanted, to your point earlier, to find these rare cases, these cases that most people haven't heard of.
And that's fine. David, that's totally fine. I'm not one of the Phoenix Lights believers.
Yeah.
Okay, so and certainly I was in Phoenix when that went down. And although I didn't see it, I had come back that night from Phoenix. I arrived at Burbank Airport. I came into my house. I put down my luggage. I think I cracked a beer and turned on the TV. It was just, I was settling in. I've been in Phoenix for a week. And boom, this is the breaking news on TV. So I sat down and watched it. And I looked, and the original lights, or the original news reports in L.A. were of the flares dropping but behind the mountain, which some people still want to say that was some kind of craft. And I hate it when
I'm
they
in complete agreement with you.
Yes, I hate it when they show that picture.
If you've seen military flares dispatched, that's what they look like.
That's exactly what that is. And so I was sitting there thinking, wow, I don't remember that. Wow, I just missed it. Okay. But I'm looking at it and I'm like, I don't see a craft. Now, as time went on and we get the other stories about Phoenix and the state and, flying down to Tucson, the V-shaped craft, do you find, what did you think about that element of the Phoenix Lights? Now, again, I have a hard time digesting the whole story, and I've got people out there that are angry with me to this day. But there was definitely two separate events, and the flares.
There were two separate events, and what I found particularly interesting is the fact that with Phoenix, to your point, you had reports of this large object that was seen traversing from the northwest to the southeast.
Right.
Which obviously took it over Phoenix proper. And then shortly thereafter, as you mentioned, the A-10 Warthogs were dropping flares over the Barry Goldwater test range. And I found it an interesting parallel with an earlier wave of sightings involving boomerang-shaped and or triangular-shaped objects, namely the Hudson Valley wave of New York, which, if you recall, the initial witnesses described large triangular and or boomerang-shaped objects, but then shortly after that, reports started coming in of private pilots that were flying in formation with strange lights affixed to their planes. And it's almost as if, and I don't want to speculate, but let me just humor me for a moment.
I will.
It's almost as if a legitimate UFO sighting event occurred, and the powers that be, in order to maintain plausible deniability, suddenly sent out A-10 Warthogs to drop flares, or suddenly had private pilots go up in Cessnas with lights attached to their planes, as if to muddy the water, as if to dispel any serious attention that might have been drawn by the actual UFO events themselves.
And what a better vehicle to pull that off with when you have an Air Force base right there.
Absolutely.
And you're doing maneuvers, and
absolutely,
and they happen to, I hate the word coincidence, happen on the same night. And
well,
no, think about that.
Absolutely.
So there was the two videos that do exist of the V that flew southeast, down towards Tucson. And again, if anybody knows that area of the country, that is a huge chunk of desert between Phoenix and Tucson. You can drive, I forget how long the drive is. I've done it 100 times. And my good friends that are out there all know I have friends in Tucson and friends in Phoenix, and I would drive in between the two cities a couple times a month. Okay, I'd fly to Phoenix. It was on business. And anyway, there's nothing there. So there's a reason why there's not a ton of video of this flight path going down, because there's not a whole lot of stuff there. It's desert. Okay, now, but the two videos that I have seen are pretty crazy. And there is obviously something going across the sky with a definite V shape, just like the picture that you have here in the lower right-hand corner. And it definitely has structure, and you can see as it's flying, you can see it blocking out the stars. You can see the stars in the background disappear. That is not what was over the Camelback Mountains in the North Phoenix with the flares. That's two different things.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely. And you have to wonder if, in fact, action like that was taken. You have to ask the question, why? And to me, the only logical answer is something legitimately of an unusual nature took place to warrant them to take that action.
Right. That's a good comparison with Hudson Valley, by the way. Yeah, I didn't really look at it like that, but that's what was done in Hudson Valley. There's no question about that. And then, with Phoenix, okay. I haven't thought about that, and I'm sure a lot of listeners right now are thinking the exact same thing. That makes a lot of sense.
And that's why I really like to kind of, as I like to say, look at the big picture. When there's one interesting UFO case, I really like to start doing kind of a comparative analysis to see, does this match, or are there characteristics with regard to this case that match others? And I came to the conclusion that I found that very interesting, that in both cases, it's almost like someone was trying to dispel any type of legitimacy regarding these sightings by possibly taking this action.
Now let's go through. I haven't heard from Keith, and if we don't have to eat up into Michio, we won't do that. But anyway, I want to just really quick. What is the Durham County, UK? Let's click on that really quick, which is the first. Oh, okay. All right. Now, as I'm looking at this illustration, this is 1995. And I'm curious where it says area between lights black.
Yes.
Okay, so and nothing is pulsing. That's but it had a red light on the front that pulsed.
Yes. There are variations with the lightings and the lighting patterns, and of all of the variations with the UFO reports, more often than not, it's the lighting patterns that vary, and quite often change while the observer is looking at the UFO. The lighting will change. And that brings up the question that I always get: if these things want to be hidden, if these things want to be secret, why are they lit up like Christmas trees?
They fly across the universe, and they get here, and they just turn on lights.
Exactly. And, and I've thought about this long and hard, as I'm sure many ufologists out there have, and enthusiasts. if I were to speculate, and again, I hate to speculate, I really like just to go based on what is documented, but I obviously don't believe that these aircraft are trying to meet the demands of the FAA with regard to lighting requirements for aircraft.
Exactly.
And obviously, they're not here to make themselves known in the sense, landing on the White House lawn. But based on some of the lighting patterns, some of the sequencing that I've seen in some of these reports, I think that perhaps, and this is sheer speculation on my part, perhaps the lights are an inherent part of the propulsion system.
Okay, Keith just said to me, he said, after a 3-hour show, you want 2 more minutes?
Yeah, we could Keith, talk for another 3 hours.
Yeah, we absolutely could. Keith, don't worry about it. We'll end on time. We've got exactly 7 minutes left. So let's get to a couple of more things. And you know what? I didn't even know we had the map of the Illinois incident right here.
Yes.
And there's Scott Air Force Base, and this would have been great for everybody. I so humbly apologize.
Oh, no, that's something that they can certainly reference
yes.
and take a look at for themselves.
Yes, but, absolutely.
And just while we're referencing that, again, the December 1967 sighting occurred just right there where Shiloh is noted.
That is crazy. That my friend, is another book right there just on the 2 or 3 cases, because you can go to the New York case or the Maryland case too as well. But it would be a great movie. I mean, it's the same city.
I couldn't agree with you more. I've actually had a few friends and colleagues read the book, and they said, this would be great if you could somehow incorporate all of this into a movie. And I couldn't agree more.
Okay, let's go to Cardiff on the top row. Top right, everybody. Top right. Cardiff UFO, South Wales, 1983. January of 1983. Again, now, when did the Belgian wave kick off?
The Belgian wave actually started on November. We have a pretty specific date, November 29th, 1989.
Now, so this is 6 years before that.
Correct.
And the only reason why I bring up the timing of it is because it's Wales. It's it's right there in Eastern or Western Europe, UK. So in the vicinity, but it's 6 years apart. So what is behind this? This is intriguing. How big was it first? Let's start there. Was it black?
It was black. It was reported by a woman and her husband. It was a silent object, estimated roughly 1,000 feet altitude. And it was just one of a series of sightings that was taking place in and around Cardiff at that time. And the sightings continued and actually tended to escalate. And when you look at the pattern and the worldwide distribution and the timeline, this was actually a precursor, as you kind of referenced, Jimmy, to the Belgian wave. And there was a huge wave of sightings between 1983 and November of 1989. So it's almost as if the activity began in the UK and then shifted towards Belgium.
And you know what was really cool about this show tonight, David? And I hope I respect you, and I hope you respect me for it. We didn't spend 5 minutes on Belgium. And you know what? For everybody else out there, and we spent 2 minutes on Phoenix. And that's how intriguing this subject is.
There's so much information out there, and there's such a rich history. And like I said in my book, I hopefully have conveyed that, to the audience, because I've had people come up to me and say, I knew about these triangles, but I had no idea how far the reports have gone back as far as historically speaking. And that's probably the highest compliment I could get paid, because really that's really what I was trying to convey, is that there's a rich history here. Of course, we know ufology in general has a rich history, but specifically with regarding these triangles, it's just fascinating. And the documentation, this is from the local newspapers of the time, but I also cite cases from the declassified Ministry of Defense files.
Yes. I just got a text from our producers. We have, oh man, I don't have any time to do this. What page is it on? Let me go here. It's, we have, I think it's on our info contact page. Is that where it's at? We have the Ministry of Defense's classified files. Okay.
Excellent.
We have the entire setup on our website, and I'm scrolling down looking for it now. Where is it? No, it is not there, and I'm feeling really dumb right now at the moment. Hold on.
Too much information.
Well,
it's hard to keep track of it all.
But were you able to? It's the one we have. Yeah, I understand. I just can't. The website is so big, I even get lost on it. But we have the Ministry of Defense's setup here.
Excellent.
Every page. Were you able to go through the MOD's total release, and what did you glean from that? We have it here. We have 600 pages on the website.
I painstakingly went through everything that was declassified up to that point and tried to find, and again, what's in the book is only just some of the best cases I was able to glean, but there had numerous triangular UFO reports going very far back in time. And the one that really came to mind, and to me, and Jimmy, I'd appreciate your input on this, for people that say that these are just top secret military aircraft, then why on January 6, 1995, did we have a near collision with a triangular UFO in a British Airways 737?
100%.
Just outside Manchester Airport.
And this is the thing about that case, David, is it was talked about for about 10 hours.
Yes.
10 hours. I talked to Philip Mantle about that.
Yes.
And I asked him, I said, why the silence on day 2?
Mm-hmm.
When you have, it wasn't just a pilot. You had ground crews, you had the local police, you had confirmation from the tower, the airline, all in a row. And then the next day, you would have thought there would have been some follow-up somewhere. He told me he couldn't get any information from anybody anywhere. Yeah. He made all the phone calls. He tried to get information. Nothing, nobody wanted to talk about it. You're absolutely right. And that was from Philip himself.
Yeah, if we have a multi-million-dollar, let's just speculate, top-secret aircraft that fits this description, the last place we're going to fly it is in an active air corridor where 737s are landing at Manchester Airport. That makes absolutely no sense whatsoever.
And his description was unbelievable, too. Okay, hold on. Yeah, okay, producers just said it's time for us to go. So you know what? I did this last night. I'm going to do it tonight with you. You're going to roll with the music and say goodnight to everybody with me at the end. How does that sound?
Excellent.
I really had a great time tonight, David. And now, before we get out of here, David's excellent book. Just go to his name on the homepage, and we always keep it up there, and it'll always be there live on our guest page. We do that for everybody, but click on his name, David Marler. It's right there. That will take you straight to Dolan Press, and all of the information that you need for the book or David, his bio, everything is right there. And I strongly suggest, and Richard promised me that you were going to be the best guest ever, and he wasn't wrong. And
well, thank you, Jimmy.
No, thank you. And thank you, Richard, for publishing the book, too, as well. So let's, you know what? I got to cue the music, and we'll cue the music, and we'll do the ending credits, and we'll get out of here together. I want to thank you again and thank everybody for coming in tonight and listening to Fade to Black. Our guest was David Marler. Stay tuned. Coming up next, on time, will be Michio Kaku and Explorations. Next, it's After Dark Live with my guy, Brian Alvarez. Special thanks to Keith Rowland and Art Bell. Fade to Black's executive producer is Rita Kamarian. Show is produced by Hilton J. Palm and Mark D. Kovar. The announcers are Steve Harder and Mark D. Kovar. Music, you're listening to him right now, is Doug Aldrich.
Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Dark Matter Radio Network. We'll see you next week. We're going to have Graham Bonnet in here from the band Rainbow and a couple of other special surprises. Say goodnight, David.
Good night to everyone.
Thank you, man. Good night, everybody. Have a great, safe weekend. I am out of here.